Steve. Good morning and welcome to the Regional Issues Summit. My name's Ann Hutchison and I'm the Executive Vice President of the Fort Collins Chamber. I have the pleasure of kicking off our summit today. The summit is a production of the Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance, the Fort Collins Area Chamber of Commerce, the Loveland Chamber of Commerce, the Greeley Area Chamber of Commerce, Upstate Colorado, and one NOCO. I want to start today with a few thank yous. Session is only possible due to the amazing support of our sponsors, and you'll see them moving across the screen today, and they're posted on our event website. But a very special thank you goes out to Elevations Credit Union, UC Health, BizWest, Columbine Health Systems, OfficeScapes, Woodward, Alpha Graphics, Canvas Credit Union, Northern Engineering, Sinorama, and Total Facility Care. We wanted to let you know that we are tweeting today. So if you would like to join the conversation, please do. We are using hashtag NOCO Regional Issues. Again, that's hashtag NOCO Regional Issues. We also want to let you know that all of the materials from today will be available on the NCLA website as well as the Fort Collins Area Chamber website. That'll include the videos from this experience and any other resources that we might be exposed to throughout the morning. Finally, we do want to encourage you to take advantage of our Q&A box. It's a place to drop questions. You can also share observations. Just a really great way to interact with the experience today. So feel free to drop anything you'd like into that Q&A box, and we'll certainly take advantage of that throughout the day. We want to make the most of your time today, so let's get right to it. I'm honored to turn the microphone over to our NCLA Chairman of the Board, Steve Toole. So it looks like Steve's still having some audio problems, so we're going to jump right in.
I'm good. I think I'm good.
Great, Steve.
Sorry for the confusion this morning. Thanks, Ann, and good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you to this year's Regional Issues Summit. It is my hope that this year's version of the Regional Issues Summit is the first, last, and only virtual summit we ever have, but I'm not willing to bet on that. Anyway, thanks for joining us today. As you know, the Regional Issues Summit is a forum that focuses our attention on issues facing Northern Colorado and is a collaborative effort of the NCLA partners. The program today will feature many of our elected officials, highlight issues that face us, and give us a chance to highlight our priorities. In order to influence regional, state, and federal policy on issues affecting Northern Colorado, the Chamber leadership from the Loveland, Greeley, and Fort Collins Chambers of Commerce collaborated some 28 years ago to create one unified force on issues in support of businesses and named it the Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance. NCLA boasts over 2,500 members. Its board is comprised of 6 business leaders from each of our 3 chambers, the executive officer from each chamber, and 1 member from each of our economic development organizations, Upstate Colorado, and 1 NOCO. The fundamental purpose of NCLA is to influence public policy and the people and organizations that make that policy for the economic benefit of our 2-county Northern Colorado region. Some examples of our accomplishments include preserving the oil and gas industry and its legacy in our state and specifically Weld County, Interestingly, Weld County is the home of about 90% of Colorado's crude oil production and is by far the state's largest producer of natural gas. Promoting the importance of healthcare in our economy and for our quality of life, NCLA formed a healthcare working group 3 years ago, and it has held 23 meetings over the last 3 years looking at the quality, access, and affordability of healthcare in our two-county area with specific attention to behavioral health, Medicaid, and that program's challenges, the adequacy of the workforce, and since last February, COVID-19 and its many challenges. Protecting and supporting the development of water resources. We have taken special interest in testifying in multiple settings on the positive attributes of NISP, the Northern Integrated Supply Project, championing our status as an agriculture leader in Colorado. According to a ranking I saw a year ago, Weld County was ranked as the number 9 agriculture county in the country and the number 1, obviously, in Colorado. Driving funding for transportation and infrastructure. NCLA started actively promoting the expansion of the I-25 corridor in 2015. Since then, we have worked relentlessly to secure funding to widen I-25 to 3 lanes in each direction between Highway 15, Mulberry, and in Fort Collins, and Highway 66 north of Longmont by 2025. You can see the progress. Over $1 billion have gone into this expansion. Supporting education through talent and workforce initiatives. We recognize that good paying jobs are dependent upon having a high quality, well-educated, and well-trained workforce. For a list of all of our priorities, please refer to our document, NCLA's 2021 Priorities. And now let me introduce our first panel. The title of this presentation is The 2020 Election, What Happened and What Does It Mean to Business? Our panel will be led by Sandra Solon. Sandra is the founder and president of her own lobbying firm, Capital Solutions. She's been NCLA's issues manager and lobbyist since 1994, 2 years after NCLA was founded. She's done a great job for us over all of these years. Before Sandra introduces the panel, however, I want to say something about Joy Bunch. Joy, we have never met, so I decided to watch your presentation at the Issues Summit last year. You said 2 remarkable things that have been on my mind since I watched that video, and each of these had some significant impact with hindsight. You said, this is November of last year, nobody knows what the next 6 months will bring. Boy, how true that was. And you also said, we are having a health care crisis. Well, you thought we were having a crisis then. Well, look at the crisis we're having now. You had great foresight. With that, Sandra, take over your panel.
We had a little election last week, exactly, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about that and what it means for business in Colorado amid the pandemic, all the politics that have surrounded the social unrest, the wildfires. A little election, as I mentioned, was at the height of it all, and we had record voter engagement. In fact, as you've probably heard, Colorado was off the charts in terms of the turnout, and it really reflected a strong sense of citizens' desire to voice their opinions. And of course, we saw at the presidential level that driving much of the debate. Colorado, we saw a definitive and unquestionable restatement from 2018 that Colorado is a blue state. And for the first time in 84 years, Democrats will control every statewide elected position across Colorado. And interestingly, there was a story about it's the 4th time in state's history when Democrats have controlled the governor's office, Secretary of State, Treasurer, Attorney General, House, Senate, U.S. House of Representatives seats, and both the U.S. Senate seats. We are, as a business community, have to take into account the political landscape in which we are operating, and important that we set the stage for the upcoming legislative session in 2021. I've invited two of my favorite journalists to join me this morning to share their perspectives and engage in a conversation about what this means for business. First, we have Joey Bunch, who brings his Southern charm to Colorado, and he is the senior correspondent and deputy managing editor for Colorado Politics. His 32-year career includes the last 16 in Colorado. And interestingly, he was part of the Denver Post team that won the Pulitzer Prize in 2013, and he himself is a two-time finalist. Again, he brings a wonderful perspective to the political scene in Colorado, and we're just thrilled to have him. Also joining me is Ed Seelever. He's the reporter with the Denver Business Journal, and he joins us today, bringing this very unique perspective to his work. He is the business writer and politics writer for the Denver Business Journal. So he has this remarkable blend of insights into the landscape in which we as a business community operating. He covers, in his work, he covers the government, tourism, and the beverage industry. And in his over 20-year journalism career, he's received 77 state, regional, and national awards in categories ranging from investigative reporting to political reporting to public service. But it should also be noted, he is quite a writer on the food scene, and in particular related to beer. So want to thank both of them so much for joining us today. And I am going to ask Joey to kick things off for us and share your thoughts on the 2020 election.
I'm accepting the applause. I can feel it coming. A standing ovation. Thank you people so much. I appreciate it. I would give you a standing ovation, except I'm wearing pajamas on the bottom and not wearing shoes or socks either. So glad you could join me for breakfast. You know, Sandra's right. I mean, we're a blue state. And, you know, if you don't know that, then you're living under a rock the size of Wyoming. And, you know, it's been this way for a while. And, you know, Democrats hold all the executive offices, you know, just like they did 2 years ago. And, you know, unless Republicans get it together, I don't see that changing. You know, they have one statewide elected official left now that Cory Gardner's fallen to the wayside. You know, that's Heidi Ganahl, the CU region at large. And, you know, if you're a Republican or you hope to be one, the four-letter word you've got in your mind right now is ouch. But, you know, this was a tale of two elections. You know, at the top of the ticket, the Democrats ran away with it. You know, Joe Biden won, 13%. Cory Gardner lost by 9 or 10%. I forget where the numbers finally fell. But then you look down the ticket and, you know, they picked up one seat in the Senate, none in the House. You know, I had a Republican operative calling me, you know, expressing to me that he thought this year was a victory for Republicans in the legislature. But, you know, I say that, you know, when you're in the minority, if you're standing still, then you're falling behind. You know, I don't know what Democrats will do that's different. They have a 41-24 advantage in the House still, you know, the same measure that they had going in. And then they picked up one seat in the Senate. You know, if this was a blue wave year, in the legislature, it was more of a blue puddle. So, yeah, I don't know what to expect next year, to tell you the truth. I'm hoping Ed knows so I can find out. You know, ask me again in a month and I'll have a better idea. I'm just here to lay some truth on you. So, you know, the Polis agenda, you know, Ed and I could dazzle you all day with the Polis agenda, but, you know, the man's coming up at 11 o'clock. So hang around and you'll enjoy his speech as much as we do. And I see a continuation of those four bold initiatives he laid out in his campaign. And he's shown in his first 2 years that he's going to work on, you know, renewable energy by 2040, affordable health care. He was here talking about that last year, you know, universal preschool and fiscal reform. Now, you know, the first three are pretty obvious, and they've had a deep impact on northern Colorado, just like the rest of Colorado. But, you know, the last one, fiscal reform, you know, that one's a little bit different. You know, we got rid of the Gallagher Amendment last week. So I think if this blue wave continues and starts rolling in a little bit more heavily, then we're going to see another run at Tabor. So, you know, if that's what it takes to get Republicans to turn out, maybe that'll do it. You know, at the top, you know, I'll talk a little bit more about where I see Republicans politically. You know, they've got some young talent. Heidi Ganal is definitely a young talent, but so is George Brockler. There's others that could rise, but I just don't know if now's the time. Both Heidi and George are still very young, so they could run in the future. I just don't know right now that people want to get the stink of losing on them, because Colorado is a state that once you get this, more than any other state I've worked in, and I've worked in a half dozen states, once you get the stink of losing on you, if you lose a race or two, then people just see you as a loser, and you can run as many times as you want, and you're not going to shake that loose. And as I look into my crystal ball, I do maybe see a conservative Phoenix rising over Weld County. We'll just have to wait and see, and if that pans out. The bottom line is money. Republicans got to be able to raise money. If you remember 2 years ago, Walker Stapleton was supposed to be the rich guy in the race. And then after it, his people were telling me that they spent all their time raising money. So unless a candidate shows up with money, it's going to be hard to beat Jared Polis in 2 years. And a second Polis term, we'll see what that means. But maybe he'll tell us today. Until Republicans are in their ascendancy again, they really need to work on their negotiating skills if they're going to get anything done. And, I'll just finish this up by telling you a story. Bob James, he was the governor of Alabama. He was a running back at Auburn. Alabama just elected a U.S. senator that used to coach at Auburn. Alabama's got a lot of problems. They should be having Alabama fans do that work, but they don't. But Bob James, he told me a story one time. He said that, when you're in the minority, you've got to learn when to say scat, and you got to know when to say here, kitty, kitty. And as long as the numbers are against Republicans, they're going to have to become cat charmers. I don't know, in this hyper-politicized, hyper-polarized environment, if that's still possible. The GOP needs statesmen and women to be problem solvers, not bomb throwers. That's the state of politics as I see it.
Great.
Andrea?
Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate that. That's always unique insight that you bring, and a wit that we can all enjoy. A little bit of levity in politics is always a good thing. It's gotten a little serious around here.
The world needs a jackass.
So we move to Ed C. Lover to share his perspectives as well on the election and what it means for business, with his, again, unique insight into the business intersect with politics. We appreciate the perspective that he brings. So Ed.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I think in your looking at this election from the business perspective, it was a decidedly mixed bag for business. Business put their money most heavily into repealing the Gallagher Amendment. And that worked out despite a lot of headwinds, including the idea of having to explain what this 38-year-old complex amendment was and why you want to repeal something that would tend to benefit homeowners more than business owners. They managed to do so. And I think that's going to help business in the long run. It's going to ensure they don't continue to bear more than the current brunt that they already have for paying property taxes in the state, and will help out in the state's overall business atmosphere, as property taxes on business, as well as business personal property taxes, are one of the few things that are really dragging down the state's ability to recruit companies here. On the other hand, business lost its other key measure, and that was the paid family and medical leave measure. Starting in 2023, every employer in the state is going to be paying into a state fund, unless they get permission from the state to opt out of it, to ensure that their employees have as many as 12 weeks of partially paid leave each year. This was one of those issues that I think in talking to most business folks, and if you're listening to this, you probably have this perspective, that everybody likes ideologically and hated in practice. And now we are going to see exactly what the ramifications are going to be. Is this going to spur businesses who have said, I want to give these benefits in an era where even in this economic downturn, benefits are still going up as an attractant and retainer for employees? Is this going to spur more businesses to come up with clever ways to offer paid family medical leave, particularly so they don't have to use the state's program? Or is this, as some people have predicted, going to cause businesses to slow growth and to slow down spending over the next couple of years as they get ready to go under the thumb of the state in providing this program? When you go down the ballot after that, you try to look for clues about what's going to happen. And I think I'll go to the state legislative races here. I find it very interesting that, as Joey mentioned, in a year that was supposed to be a blue wave, that the Democrats dropped $6 million into legislative races and only made a +1 gain, 1 seat in the Senate. They now hold a 20-15 advantage there. 0 seats in the House. They still hold a 41-24 advantage. So it's not exactly like they lost ground. But the Senate is something really worth keeping an eye on. And here are the intricate details of why. Last year, a number of bills made it out of the House, or were going to make it out of the House if they had passed out of the Senate and gotten to the House, and didn't make it out of the Senate. And we're talking about bills such as the full version of House Bill 1420. This is the bill that was going to repeal about $1.8 billion in business tax exemptions to fund K-12. That bill was cut down, possibly you could say eviscerated, with the way that it was reduced to a number of non-controversial tax breaks that were cut. The Senate was unable to pass paid family and medical leave, which is why it went to a ballot measure. A bill that would have done arbitration reform in a way that would have cut into construction defects reform from 3 years ago was completely changed when it came out of the Senate. And the reason it was is because there is a cadre of moderate Democrats in the Senate who are able to step in and influence those bills. The question now is, how much influence will they have? If you look at the Senate, there are generally 3 people who I think are considered these strong moderates on business issues in particular. Those would be Senator Rachel Zenzinger of Arvada, Senator Joanne Janal of your area up in Fort Collins, and Senator-elect James Coleman of Denver, who's coming over from the House. If you do the math real quickly and you can't get any of those 3 senators, you can't pass a bill. That is literally the difference between 18-17 for the Republicans and passing a bill for the Democrats. That's not to say that all 3 of them will step up and block bills, but what it means is that they will have a strong hand in negotiating bills. And that is particularly true for whatever is going to be the successor to House Bill 1420. Make no mistake, Democrats have said they are coming back with a bill that is going to look to get rid of some tax exemptions they consider outdated or exclusively helping wealthy individuals and companies. And they're going to look to put more money to K-12 from that, or to other functions as well, such as higher education. Steve Fenberg, the Senate Majority Leader, acknowledged to me before the election, look, if we get more numbers, 21, 22 senators, maybe those take on a more progressive shape. Now they're back in the negotiating phase. And Fenberg has said, look, we are not going to pass bills without trying to get everyone in our caucus on there. So the key thing about the legislative elections is that while Republicans didn't gain any ground and in the Senate lost ground, they kept their numbers, they kept their deficits at a point where they will still be able to be involved in the discussions on these bills going forward. And the question is just how much that moderate bloc is going to flex their muscles when it comes to some of these issues. And you're going to see other issues come back, largely ones that failed last year, either because of or aside from the pandemic, issues such as arbitration reform are likely coming back. You're likely to see a bill take another shot that would say that if a worker contracts coronavirus, it is assumed they did it on the job, and that will automatically go to workers' compensation, which could be a very pricey bill if it was written the way it originally was for companies. These are the kind of things that are at play that I think are below the surface level of, oh, how did Trump do in our state, and did we become a blue state, and are more focused on the business community. So I think that's what you're going to see. I think the main business issue with this upcoming session is going to be the question of tax exemptions, what should stay, what is outdated. And if they can get past that, maybe, just maybe, we talk about transportation. But right now, I don't know that there is enough money in the budget where people will engage in this seriously. Both of the Transportation Committee chairs, Matt Gray in the House from Broomfield and Senator Faith Winter from Westminster, have said, look, we want to start pushing the idea of transportation, but I will say this, and then I'll move back to Sandra here. There was an election question that is going to affect that significantly, and that was the passage of Prop 117. Real quickly, I'm actually going to segue here and say I disagree with the premise that we're a blue state. This was a state that passed essentially 2 fiscal constraint measures, including a tax cut, a state that passed a restrictive measure on citizenship and voting, and a state that, while it did not pass a late-term abortion ban, gained 20 points over every previous abortion measure on the ballot to get that within striking distance this year. I think if we're a blue state, it's a dino state in that people like the name Democrats, hate Trump, hate the Republican brand, but don't want to go along with all Democratic ideals. That said, to go back to Proposition 117, this now says that if you're going to set up an enterprise, something the state funds with fees specifically directed to it, you are going to have to go to the voters to approve it if the fees are more than $100 million over the first 5 years. And if you're going to set up an enterprise, the fees are going to be that big. Any transportation solution is going to involve fees on an increase in fees on electric vehicles, fees on Ubers and Lyfts, fees on the Amazon delivery trucks that are taking up our roads more often now. That is going to make negotiations a lot harder in the legislature on transportation, but I'm willing to bet there will be talks about it, even if nothing is going to get passed in the 2021 session.
Fabulous. Fabulous, Ed. Thank you so much. Again, you see why I invite these two gentlemen to join us for this conversation this morning. Ed, I really appreciate your comment, and I think you have now definitively termed a new coin, dino. Is that what you said?
It's like a rhino, but for Democrats. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to explore that a little bit more with both of you because, yeah, I think while the election, the candidate results were certainly blue, and the outcomes are clearly in a blue category with regard to who is controlling our current offices. Talk a little bit more about how it conflicts, to your point, but maybe build upon a little bit with the outcome of the ballot questions, but also I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether the Democrats should feel as if they have a mandate, if you will. Notably, Majority Leader Steve Fenberg, you quoted in your article following the leadership elections, you quoted Steve Fenberg as saying, "We should be brazenly progressive in our values while also being inclusive in our execution." Again, I'm curious both of your thoughts on what sort of mandate exists and building further upon this question of whether we're a blue state.
Well, Ed was right when he said that, we're not really a red. I think I said last year at this summit, or I've said a lot, that, we're not really a red state or a blue state. We're a swing state. And the thing about a pendulum is if it swings, as far as it swings in this direction, it's going to swing back in this direction. So, no, Democrats don't have a mandate. Another thing I've said is that, Coloradans, they like Republican ideas. They just don't like Republicans. So any mandate that Democrats think they have, I don't know how they can say that. They didn't add any seats in the legislature. Maybe that's because they won all the swing seats. But, when they look at those ballot results, as Ed said, I don't see how they can see a state that's wanting to spend more on taxes. We see the backlash on oil and gas, Senate Bill 181. All those things have pushback. But elections have consequences too. And Democrats, are never going to have a better opportunity to push a progressive agenda now. But, the thing I know about Democrats, I don't care where they are, they love overreach. And when they overreach, we'll swing back the other direction. Ed, what do you think?
Well, I think as far as the mandate goes, the answer is a weirdly simple one. They have as much of a mandate as they did 2 years ago. They're coming out of this election with largely the same numbers. I don't think picking up one Senate seat lets you hold up a scepter and say the mandate is here when it wasn't before. And I think in that sense, they have to judge how their actions in the past 2 years influenced their election performance. If Democrats can look back at this and say, we are satisfied with this, even though it was expected to be a blue wave, we thought we could, they went for some seats in the House that nobody thought they could pick up 2 years ago. And they didn't pick them up other than one seat in the Littleton area, which was offset by a loss in the Pueblo area. And I think if they look at the election results and say, this confirms that people are pleased with what we did in the legislature the last 2 years, that being the oil and gas bill, that being, I'm so focused on business, I'm about to say something like public safety or gun restrictions, but I'm not even sure exactly what came out of that the last 2 years. But I mean, you look business-wise, the oil and gas bill, that being the passage of paid sick leave, not paid family medical leave, but the ability to earn paid sick leave. And if they look at those things and say, okay, we think that people were satisfied with that, we're going to keep going down this line, we can do it. If they look at the election as somewhat of a disappointment and say, maybe people didn't like our message the way we wanted because we thought we'd pick up Kevin Priola's Senate seat in the Brighton area. We thought that we would pick up Bob Rankin's seat in Northwest Colorado. Then that may inform their decision on how to go forward. Again, I don't think it changes what's going forward. The issues are pretty much cemented in stone. It's a matter of exactly how progressive they are going to seek to be in these bills. And I expect that what you'll see is bills that are introduced by members in safe seats that are more progressive that will be negotiated down throughout the course of the session.
Agree with all that.
Yeah, interesting. Let's shift a little bit to the budget and what it portends for the next year, and in particular the economic recovery and the opportunities for encouraging growth in our economy. What are you expecting to see? The governor obviously released his budget, his proposed budget. What sort of receptivity do you see to that? Where are the opportunities? Ed, you mentioned transportation. If there might be some additional room for general fund dollars into transportation to continue the investment that has thus far been made. So, any thoughts on the budget?
I don't have many thoughts on the budget, except that it all depends on what happens at the federal level. I was talking to Governor Polis just a week or so ago about transportation. And, Trump talked about this $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Infrastructure was part of the stimulus package that came out of the House. And then Mitch McConnell said, no, we're not going to put it in there. We'll work on transportation after the election. So, what they do there, what the next stimulus package is going to greatly influence this budget. How fast Polis can get back on his agenda items like universal preschool. They just passed Proposition EE to put money into preschool. So, I don't think we're controlling our fate right now. I think the recovery in Washington is controlling it. Ed?
Yeah, I think as far as transportation goes, you saw that Jared Polis suggested $200 million toward shovel-ready infrastructure projects as part of a $1.3 billion stimulus, I should say, to try to recover from coronavirus. That also includes things like special help for restaurants and bars and other heavily affected businesses, as well as incentives to clean energy businesses and some other of Polis's favorite industries. I don't know that we get much beyond the 200 million discussions there. I think especially the way Polis has laid this out, and it was a very astute political move, putting that much money toward the areas that everybody wants. Here's some for small business Republicans. Here's some for clean energy Democrats. Here's some for transportation, folks in the middle who want to go with that. And I think that is going to lessen the impact that there's going to be a big budget effort coming out this year. And it's going to be a little bit affected by the recovery that we have right now. But I also think that the fights this year won't be about this budget. They'll be about future budgets. And again, I'm going to keep going back to this. It's going to be about how much do you cut from people and businesses that are getting tax breaks now, and how much do you put toward education, do you put toward healthcare in the future. So I think this budget is going to provide just minimal opportunity. 200 million isn't small potatoes, but we do have a $9 billion infrastructure backlog right now. And the fights will be about structuring the budget for the future and how much the state wants to raise in other ways than asking for direct tax hikes for future budgets.
Hey, Ed, you raised good points. Andrew, if you don't mind my asking Ed about it. The governor wants to spend this money, but does the legislature want to spend this money? Once it goes through the spin cycle of the Democrat-controlled House and Senate, are they going to hold transportation as a priority when, frankly, they haven't done it in the past? What do you think, Ed?
It is going to be there is going to be a lot of debate about it. It's going to be a little hard for them, I think, to argue that it shouldn't go on. I mean, don't forget the people who build roads and buildings in the state are often union members, and so they will probably get some push from some of their base to go ahead and continue to push that through. I think the fact that the governor, as well as putting the stimulus package out there, the governor made whole the budgets, or proposes to make whole the budgets of K-12 and higher education, cuts into a little bit of where Democrats would try to redirect some of that stimulus money to. So there will be debate about it, and maybe the 200 million comes down to 100 million or so, but I don't know that it's good political capital to spend on taking all transportation and infrastructure money out of the budget. I think Polis set this up in a way that's going to make it hard for there to be massive changes unless we see that the people of Colorado don't want business help and don't want infrastructure help.
Yeah. Well, you know, past is prologue, and the past has disappointed me a lot in the past. So I hope you're right and I'm wrong. And maybe if the governor's watching, he'll explain how wrong I am and we can all be happy.
Well, we are, as of course, the NCLA, transportation being such a critical issue for us, and our further encouragement of general fund, we will certainly be encouraging a full $200 million directed to transportation this year. Want to shift real quick to the climate policy and your thoughts. The governor's office of the Colorado Energy Office, and we'll actually be hearing from Will Tour shortly, but they released their greenhouse gas reduction roadmap this last month, I guess it was, and so there's a lot of input being taken right now into that conversation. Back to this earlier question, both on revenue side and on sort of the political landscape and their sense of whether this is something that they can continue driving forward. What is your sense around that climate policy agenda that is being pursued through the greenhouse gas reduction roadmap?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in on this one. I think. First of all, I think there's a lot of questions about what exactly goes on in the climate policy. Don't forget, even people who back the general idea of, look, we need to make policy for inhibiting climate change here, said, well, thanks, Governor, but there's not really a lot of specific goals that you put in this. It's more like, oh, let's electrify the state's transportation grid. Let's bring down some of our sources of pollution. I don't know at this point how much the legislature weighs in on this. And the reason is because it seems like the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission has taken that mantle largely over. I mean, the fact that this is a group that was, changed and given more power in many ways through Senate Bill 181, and that they've decided to push forward with 2,000-foot setbacks after state voters rejected 2,500-foot setbacks. I think there's a feeling that, what does the legislature play into this now? Let's just let the COGCC, which is still going to be going through rulemaking for the next year or so, really take it where it's going and go from there. I think you're going to see some efforts to put more money toward electric vehicles and electrification, but there's only so much you can do there. There's already a good amount of money, specifically from the Volkswagen settlement, that is going into putting up chargers on roads around the state. You can't force people to give up their cars. I guess you could. California's going to give that a good shot, but I don't think that has ever been in the Polis Tour agenda. It's incenting people and moving people more toward why you want electric vehicles. So you may see greater incentives being proposed for them, but I don't think there's a huge amount there to do. The one area where the legislature may weigh in on climate policy is the issue of whether you start attacking construction area emissions. That's been one area that CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, has said before, look, we don't really go after emissions that are not coming from tailpipes and they're not coming from oil and gas rigs. So I think you may look at that a little bit, but nobody seems to have an idea what shape that's going to take just yet. So I think climate policy will be lower on the agenda, at least for 2021, as the COGCC continues to take the reins on that. Joey, thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I said earlier, elections have consequences, but these consequences with the election 2 years ago, as Ed said, I don't see that much that much new ground to charge. And maybe that's why they didn't pick up more seats, is because they have been so aggressive on these issues. But, as far as climate change goes, if they want to regulate the state's greatest source of hot air, they'll regulate the state capitol.
That is the perfect note to end on. Joey, always well done. I want to thank Ed and Joey for joining us today. Again, their insights and the levity with which they bring to the political scene is so greatly appreciated, and enjoy working with you both immensely. And thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks
We
for having us.
are going to move on to our next part of the agenda, and that is to introduce you to your Northern Colorado legislative delegation. We are so fortunate to have a delegation that works so incredibly well together for the broad interests of Northern Colorado, both of obviously our business interests, our economic interests, and the general community interests of our unique region. And we expect no different after the outcome of this last election, with the election of several new legislators in our delegation. I am going to start with several who are actually at retreat. The House Republicans are in retreat today and have stepped away from their meeting to say hello. We're going to do just a quick hello from everyone. And again, thank you so much for jumping in. So I'm going to start with actually Representative Hugh McKean from Loveland. Representative McKean was just elected as a minority leader in the House. So I'll be referring to Leader McKean. And so Representative McKean, if you can wave and say hello a second. Are you there? No. Okay. I knew he was good. He has the information to sign on. Well, if he pops on, great. I am seeing, maybe I'll, okay. So Representative-elect Mike Lynch from Wellington. Are you joining us today? Representative Lynch represents District 49. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Like I said, we've had some folks having to step away from their retreat. So my apologies. Okay. Let me run through. So Representative Lynch is from Wellington and representing District 9. Representative-elect Tanya Van Beber, is she on by chance?
Right here.
Okay, great. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. It's great to see you. Wonderful to have you. You want to just say a couple words and be done? Literally a couple, a minute.
I'm just honored to be here and be able to find out what it is that you all will be talking about today, and look forward to visiting with you all in the future about the things that are concerning you this next legislative session.
Oh, all of you are there. I see Representative-elect Lynch and Representative Woog with you. So why don't we stay on that screen a moment? So I introduced Representative-elect Mike Lynch as well. And Representative-elect Lynch, say hello.
Hello, guys. Glad to be with you as we are we're drinking from a fire hydrant, learning our new job here. And getting to know people on both sides of the aisle down here so we can be effective leaders down in Denver. And really excited to see what comes out of this meeting today to give us some direction and guidance on the important issues you guys have. So we look forward to carrying your banner forward. Thank you for accommodating us not being able to hang out all day here. So thank you.
No worries. Glad you're able to join us. And Representative-elect Dan Woog from Erie, thrilled to have you join us as well. Say hello.
Yeah, thank you very much. How are you guys doing today?
Great.
Good. Yep, just same sentiments. Happy to be here and look forward to working with you guys. So thank you for having us today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, enjoy your retreat. I don't know if you see, or there he is. Fantastic.
I was hiding around the corner. That's
Wonderful. Hello, Representative, our Mr. Leader, Hugh McKean, who was just elected the Assistant Minority Leader. Say a word or two. We're thrilled to see you.
Well, I'm glad to see you guys. Thank you for putting this together. And in fact, I know you said you'd make it available afterwards so that we can kind of catch up on some of the discussions. So that'll be good.
We're down here in Colorado Springs doing our new member retreat, kind of meeting other members, but literally to start forming those relationships that will likely be a way to get things done this year. And a lot of the way to get things done is probably going to be a lot of amendments, a lot of long discussions about how we can make bad things better. But I think there's still a path for people to get good bills through, and a lot of discussions about transportation, which in my world means concrete and asphalt. And certainly the budget's going to occupy a huge piece of this year. And we swept the cash funds last year. So this year, they're really going to have some hard work to do. So I'm here for you. Sandra, you know that I'm not only available, but certainly it'll be good to set up regular ongoing meetings so I can hear what's on your mind long before big things drop. So we know we're on the same page. So thank you all. And you guys, I think, all have my cell phone. So please don't text me for another 48 hours because I think it broke last night, but I'm not sure. There was a little wisp of smoke coming out of it. But yeah, just reach out to me if you need something and certainly let me know. Any questions from you guys?
No, we're in a tight time frame. I will mention we have on December 1st, and before I introduce everyone else, we have on December 1st an hour-long engagement with our entire delegation, and we invite those of you who are joining us today to join us for that conversation because we want to be able to dive into key issues with our delegation and have the opportunity for you all to ask questions. So look for information about that. But before we go, I'm going to say hello to our next newly elected legislator, and that is Senator-elect Barb Kirkmeyer. Say hello, Barb. She is no stranger to many as the current Weld County Commissioner. She'll be leaving that post and joining us in the Senate. So if Barb wants to wave and say just, hello real quick, we'll see her on another panel too.
Great. I hope you, excuse me, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, thank you, Sandra, for inviting us to come in and just say a quick hello. Have thoroughly enjoyed working with Sandra and NCLA for the last 12 years as a Weld County Commissioner, and we've worked on the really important issue of transportation, but many other issues. Look forward to working with you all as a state senator in a different capacity and different role. And I'm sure Sandra will help me learn up what I need to know as a state senator and how I can help move Northern Colorado forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much and congratulations. We move to our sitting legislators, House members who won their re-election, but I'll move to Representative Jenny Arndt if she's joining us to say wave and say hello. Hopefully she's with us this morning.
Hi, I was in the, this is Jenny Arndt. Hi everyone. Yeah, that was my fourth election. So thank you for having me back again. I was in the big room, so I was listening to the whole thing. But then I was like, oh, I better get on the other one. So I won't say much except for I intend to be back on the business committee this year. And so, of course, I'm happy to meet anytime with anybody. Any chamber wants to invite me, not for me to talk, but to listen. I'm happy to do that. And I reached out to my buddy, Hugh McKean, and asked him if we could go together. Because I think that people need to see Democrats and Republicans and how we actually interact and work together because we get so siloed, but elected people, we're not siloed. In fact, Hugh and I sit next to each other. So if you'd like to invite Mr. Minority Leader and myself, I'll speak for myself. I'll come. Come on, Hugh.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Representative Arndt. It's so good to see you. The other representative from Fort Collins is Representative Kathy Kipp, and she is with us today as well. Say hello.
Hi, I'm State Representative Kathy Kipp. I represent the east side of Fort Collins, whereas Jenny represents the west side. And I'm just honored to be here with you today. I serve on the Education Committee and the Energy and Environment Committee right now. So we'll see how the committee assignments shape up for next session. But I guess, my philosophy is I'm always happy to talk to anybody. So, don't hesitate to reach out. And just want to also point out that I follow in the seat the Honorable Steve Toole, who I see here as your leader and president of your organization. So thanks for having me.
But perfect. Thank you, Representative Kip. Appreciate it. And then from the east side of our region is Representative Mary Young, representing Greeley. And hi, Representative Young. Good to see you. Say hello a second for a minute.
Hello. Thank you so much for including me today. I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion on the issues for the rest of the morning. I too want to be included in any conversations you have. As a psychologist, I'm trained to listen, and I think that has served me well in my year in the legislature. And I too am committed to working across the aisle, as you can see in most of the bills that I did last year, which had bipartisan sponsorship. I'm most proud of the Energize Gap bill, which provided funding to small businesses for recovery for COVID, and intend to continue to be on public services, public health and human services, and agriculture, and we'll see what the future brings. So I am looking forward to continuing working with NCLA and represent the interests of Northern Colorado. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Representative Young. Appreciate that. And our senators, Senator Cook, Senator from Greeley, Senator Rob Woodward from Loveland, and Senator Joanne Janal from Fort Collins aren't with us today, but again, they will all be joining us on December 1st for our pre-legislative session engagement with them, hear more about the things they're working on, but then also more fully engage in the important topics that the NCLA will be working on during the next, during the 2021 legislative session. So with thanks to all of the elected officials, our Northern Colorado delegation, thank you so much. Look very, very forward to working with you and continuing our great work together. I'm passing it off, I think, now to Steve and our next panel. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being with you this morning so far. Who am I passing it off to?
I think we're going to
Steve, I think you're passing it off to me.
Yeah. Minnie McLuhan, our wonderful executive officer from Loveland.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Sandra. Our next topic is the economic landscape forecast and recovery. Your area chambers of commerce have been an essential resource for the business community. We've been at the forefront of this pandemic, providing business advocacy, working with local, state, and federal organizations to support local businesses of all sizes, and providing information, resources, and assistance to help our members survive this unprecedented economic hit. And now it's time to begin to look toward recovery. I have the great pleasure of working with this team over the last 9 months to consider what does reigniting our economy look like. So help me welcome David May, the President and CEO of the Fort Collins Area Chamber of Commerce, Josh Burks, Economic Health Director for the City of Fort Collins, and Adam Crow, Economic Manager for Larimer County. So welcome, David, Josh, and Adam, and I think, David, you're going to take it over first. Little bit of audio problem, David. You sounded much younger than what you normally would. Well, if this was a comic relief segment, we would be getting 1,000 hits right now.
Mindy, maybe one of the other of us can jump in for the time being and get us started.
Josh, go right ahead.
It looks like David may be trying to rejoin and correct his audio issue. Mindy, thank you so much. I want to echo your sentiment. Your regional partners in economic development have been working since the very beginning of this particular crisis to work together on response. And we're excited today to tell you about how we're looking to the future. I see David's just rejoined, so I'll give him a chance again to try to kick us off. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Josh. Hopefully I don't have the chipmunk voice again. It's good to be with all of you today, and sorry for that technical glitch. So Josh, do you have control of the screen?
I think Ann does, so go ahead.
All right. So obviously 2020 has been an interesting year. It's been a bit of a stinker, to say the least, and I think we joke about 2020 in a lot of ways and look forward to seeing us get by it. But it does have some economic implications for us that we do want to talk with you about. So economic situation, as you look at this next slide, we spent some time trying to understand. So as Josh was saying, and as Mindy said in her opening comments, we work well together in Northern Colorado, and the economic development leaders in the region have been focused really since May at looking at the economy, trying to understand what is happening, and then looking forward to begin to address some of the issues. So we want to give you just a quick sample. We don't want to dwell on the data today in any great detail, but these are 11 of the indicators that we have been looking at, and you can see the trend line over on the right-hand side as far as what is happening with initial unemployment claims and continued claims, et cetera. And it's a mix. When you see some of the charts we're going to share with you, obviously it was a pretty significant hit when you look at the left-hand side of some of these charts back in the early part of the year. You see what then happened in March, April, and May, and then there's been a recovery. But when you look at the right-hand side of these charts, what you'll see is we're not back to where we started the year. So I'm going to hand this over to Adam, and he's going to talk about what some of the unemployment data looks like.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Would you like me to share my screen or just, oh, never mind. Thank you, Ann. So our initial unemployment claims, I think there's probably no surprise to folks who have lived through the last 8 months or so that we had very elevated unemployment claims starting in mid-March, and they just continued to grow through April and then really didn't start to dwindle until the beginning of the summer. But when you look at our initial claims that you see here, it's really telling you those initial folks that are our first-time claimants. So it's not continuations, which we'll look at later. But moving on to the next slide, one of the most important indicators that we watch in the world of workforce and employment is the continued claims. So these are the folks who are staying on unemployment rather than moving off to employment for other reasons. And this has been particularly interesting to see in the pandemic because some of the reasons that people aren't going back to employment at the same rates are different now. So obviously we know that not all employers were able to open at the same pace or get back to their same capacity. So that's still part of what we're managing here. But also we do know that there's fear of pandemic. There's people who have conditions that don't allow them to go back to work health-wise. And then there's a lot of child care challenges that are happening right now. And that's part of why we continue to be 8 or 9% higher when it comes to our continued claims year over year. So next slide, please. All right, so unemployment rate, again, as we talked about on the first couple of slides, you can definitely understand why our unemployment rate remains high. But that spike on the top slide on the right-hand corner really illustrates the steep climb that unemployment had in the first part of the year at the beginning of the second quarter, end of the first quarter. And you can see that there's the rates of how it has maintained and the rate that it has stayed higher. You know, we're looking at 2.5% in Larimer County and 2.7% as a low, moving all the way up to 10%, and now we're about in the middle. We haven't quite gotten all the way back down to where we were previously. So working towards that, and you can see on the next slide that part of the reason that we're working toward, well, actually, I'm going to pause there. This kind of our labor force, and some reasons, it's a slight reason why our unemployment rate has dipped a bit, is that there are fewer people who are looking for employment right now. We have seen some individuals, and you can see there that it's down regionally by about 3.2%, our labor force. So these are the people who are vying for those jobs and people who are working towards finding employment and or are employed. And of course, we have seen some people have to drop out. Again, health concerns has been part of that for some individuals. Childcare has been another aspect of it. And when you look at those concerns when it comes to our additional responsibilities at home, women do make up a larger proportion than we would have seen in the past due to the specifics of COVID-19. All right, so our next slide is the one I was referencing earlier, and this is really our job postings. So our job postings, for obvious reasons, dipped very low at the first part of the pandemic, and they are starting to climb back. But it's also important to note that we have had some mainstays in our economy, specifically construction and manufacturing, which continue to not only hire but maintain levels of employment. And we are now seeing healthcare come back in and do some more hiring. So along with other businesses and some of our other essential employers opening back up at greater amounts, we're seeing our job postings climb. It is a little bit harder for some employers to find employees, so we are working with them diligently to look at what hiring people in a pandemic looks like, because it is a little different. Okay, and then I think at this point we switch back over to David.
So what you're seeing with this chart is that local merchant sales fell very dramatically in that March and April timeframe. You're seeing this gradual recovery that's taken place then through the spring and in the summer into the fall. Sales in Larimer County fell 14% below where we were in January, and in Weld County 6% lower. On this next slide, you're seeing retail sales and hospitality in Larimer County bottomed out in April, and now those sales are actually surpassing where we were in 2019, and Weld County bottomed out in April and has remained below those levels. And then on this last slide is around hotel occupancy, and what you're seeing here is a pretty significant decline. You can see Estes Park, Fort Collins, Greeley, Longmont, Loveland on these charts. And so very dramatic fall off in the spring, and you can see we're still performing significantly below the 2019 levels. So I'm going to turn it back over to Adam, and what we wanted to do is have him very quickly talk about. We wanted to paint this picture for you so you could see, and you know this has happened, but we wanted to put it actually in a form that dramatically showed the impact from early in the spring to now. But we did respond, and we're in the recovery and the reopening phase. We wanted him to talk a little bit about that part of it.
Sure, thank you, David. So as we look at response initially, we had done a lot of work over the last 3-4 years as regional partners, chambers, economic developers, municipalities, small business development centers to build strong linkages and strong partnerships. So we were able to respond quickly. And one of the first things that we recognized is that our business community needed access to resources, whether they be financial or information around unemployment or information around how to stay safe in current health orders. Which led to us creating a one-stop shop, which was the NOCOrecovers.com. Encourage you all to take a look at that webpage. It's updated daily and very informative. We also soon after realized that personal protective equipment was going to be very necessary towards businesses reopening. So taking a leadership role in setting up a marketplace for PPE and the NOCO safety supply became very important. And again, these are a lot of local distributors as well as a lot of local companies that are finding PPE there. And then almost all of our municipalities, including the city of Fort Collins, has focused on how can we bring a lot of our commerce back to our local businesses and make sure that we are supporting them. And so the 4 Collins and other initiatives have definitely risen up. And if we move to our next slide, one of the other things that we started to learn, and this was really towards the springtime, is that in a pandemic, personal behaviors have an impact on our economy and the capacity levels that businesses are able to be open. So to benefit our business community, we knew that we needed to develop some very clear and consistent and easy to digest information about what it means to keep yourself safe, your family safe, your coworkers safe, and your businesses open. And that's where Keep NOCO Open came out. And some of you may have seen masks and other materials that are out there in the world, and it's all over social media, and we encourage you to share that. But this is a partnership between all the municipalities and other NOCO economic development partners, as well as our health officials in Northern Colorado. So this continues to evolve as the pandemic does, so that we are up to date in the communication we're providing. And we will see this messaging expand soon into other forms of media, so watch for that. And please access this information on NOCOrecovers.com and share it yourselves. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Adam and David, for giving us a quick tour there of what's happened in our economy and how we've been working regionally to really respond. I'd like to change the direction for a moment and focus on what your chambers, regional economic development professionals, municipal economic development professionals are doing to really start to look ahead. It's important to shift our focus at some point. If you'll go ahead to the next slide. From the response activities that we've been heavily engaged in, what you see now is a fairly standard sort of crisis or economic downturn sort of cycle graphic, and where we've been, I think, where we've been occupying our time for the last 9 months has been primarily in response and then what we've called pre-recovery, which is the beginnings of the inflection point to really start rebuilding the economy. And I think that the data that both David and Adam highlighted show that we're now on our way into that recovery activity where the economic levels are beginning to return to what they were previously. And now it's about looking ahead into what the new normal will be and understanding what are both the opportunities and the challenges of that. So your economic development professionals got together and decided to first focus on key principles for success in any plan to help encourage economic recovery. And you see those on the screen now, and I'm not going to touch on all of them, but I want to hit on a couple because they are extremely important. The first, reinstilling confidence, has been a real focal point in our conversations. Commerce is following confidence in a crisis like the one we're seeing, which has not been precipitated by underlying economic conditions, but rather by an outside influence, in this case, a virus that has resulted in a number of public health restrictions impacting our economy. And so how do you help both the consumer and the employee feel confident again, fully engaging in the economy? And I think David will talk about that a little bit more and some of the limiting effects of having low confidence have on the overall economy. That leads us to our next principle, which is very important, which is that the work of developing a recovery plan is both practical and symbolic. It's as important that we focus on what needs to be done and how to do it well to rebuild our economy, as it is to demonstrate as a business community and as economic development professionals that we are engaged in this space and focused on doing the right things to help rebuild that economy. And where I'll stop is with the third principle there, which is that we all have a vested interest. Businesses have a vested interest in reopening to be able to return to previous revenue levels and adjust their business models and perhaps diversify revenue models. The government has an interest in getting back open because it relies on the economic activity that the business community generates to create the tax revenue that it turns around and provides service to its citizens. And as you can see, there are a number of other principles that help guide this process and hopefully lead us to a plan that ultimately allows us to understand both how to meet the challenges of this particular economic crisis, as well as what opportunities might be in there. And I think if we go to the last slide here, The group has focused on a process to build this plan that hopefully you'll begin to start seeing. We started just yesterday with a series of focus groups targeting specific industries and groups of businesses across both Larimer and Weld County to understand what's happening for them and what they're seeing. So this is really a multi-phase process to lead us to a strong recovery plan. The first phase, as it should be in just about any strategic effort, is to understand and analyze what's taking place today. That work, as you see, was completed. David and Adam went over the data analysis earlier. That's continued to be refined, and once it's fully vetted and ready for public consumption, I'm sure will be made available on NOCO Recovers as well as a number of other sites. We're now in phase 2, which is business engagement, understanding from you, the business community yourself, what's happening for you, ground truthing the data that we have analyzed, and beginning to put that all together. And that really forms the discovery process of a strategic plan and leads us then will be phase 3, which is strategy development. What are the tactics, strategies, and objectives that we want to pursue in a plan? We hope to have that completed by the end of Q1 next year, and then translate all of that into an actual action item plan for phase 4, which should be done in the April-May timeframe. Last, I want to talk about an example of the kind of things on the next slide that will be tied into this. As I'm sure you are all doing in your own business, you're sort of oscillating between developing tactics and strategizing what to do next. We recently were able to put together a Pivot Larimer County program, which is a tactic to help businesses, in essence, engage in what most startup businesses would go through, which is kind of an accelerator course to evaluate their current business model and see how they might be able to adapt to what is going to likely be a long tail recovery that is influenced by this pandemic still for many months to come, and also will be probably different consumer habits and different business models that will be successful into the next strong recovery and economic growth cycle. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to David to close us out.
Very good, Josh. Thank you. So to bring this home, we have 6 task forces of various flavors that are working on projects. One of them is the project that Josh just mentioned, which is the Pivot program. Another thing we're focused on right now, which gets us into the phase 3 of the process that Josh described, is an economic plan. And so we're in the final stages of picking a consultant. You see the proposals that are here in front of us. On the next slide, what you're seeing is some of the questions we're asking. We're spending time using this crisis to really say, what's the current situation here? What are the national trends? Where's the 2-county region headed as far as impacts from the COVID? Are there some new opportunities that come from this crisis that we could focus on? And then how do we get there? So what specifically, once we understand this situation, what specifically can we do as a region to replace the lost regional domestic product and the jobs that we've lost in our region? So that's the focus for us in the near term. We'll hopefully be making a decision this week. In the meantime, we're in this weird economy. It's not fully functioning, and you see lots of disruption that's taken place in the various business models. CSU, childcare was mentioned earlier. Manufacturers is a mixed blessing in terms of their supply chains, but there may be some great opportunities here for us. Residential real estate is going to be fine. We just don't have enough housing in our region, so in terms of pricing, that's not going to be an issue. Office is disrupted for the short term, and we don't know what the long-term impacts are going to be. And then government revenues, at least for the foreseeable future, are going to be impacted adversely. So longer-term economy, prior to COVID, we saw a strong economy here. Some of the economic drivers have been damaged when you look at Colorado State University, retail, restaurants, lodging, healthcare, oil and gas due primarily to state regulations, manufacturing. What we're trying to figure out now is what's the long-term implication. Some of these sectors will bounce back nicely. Others, it's going to take some focus and dedicated work over a number of years to see those come around. Kiplinger letter said that the economy should recover all of its COVID-19 related losses by the third quarter of 2021, which is quicker than expected, but it's still a sign that we have a deep hole to get out of. So our path forward is to be data-driven, be very intentional in our economic planning, and then work together as a region. And obviously, as you can see from this quote, it's not always what happens to you, it's what you do about it. And so I think that's the attitude you're seeing with our folks. And I want to thank Adam and Josh for your work. And I want to turn this now over to our next panel. Thank you all.
Jamie, I think you are up.
All right, I'll go ahead and hop in. I want to thank David, Josh, Adam, and Mindy again for really enlightening us around the projects we're working on here as a team and ensuring we're moving everyone together through this crisis moment. I'm proud to introduce our next panel. My name is Jamie Henning. I'm the president and CEO of the Greeley Area Chamber of Commerce. And I have the opportunity to introduce our next topic, climate policy and the Northern Colorado economy. As you all know, energy is incredibly important to Weld County and the entire Northern Colorado region. And it's a key issue for the NCLA group that we're all working with. We're working to protect and support the growth of the traditional energy sector while also discussing innovative alternative energy sectors in Colorado. Joining us today is Will Tour, Executive Director for the Colorado Energy Office, Barb Kirkmeyer, Weld County Commissioner and Senator-elect for District 23, Terry Fankhauser, President and CEO for the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and Dan Haley, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I want to welcome all of our panelists. Thank you for being here and taking time with us today. We're going to go ahead and provide an overview of the greenhouse gas roadmap. And before I introduce Will, I'll frame that out a little bit, but he'll be our first speaker today. The state's objective of meeting the near-term goals of reducing greenhouse gas pollution 26% by 2025 and 50% by 2030 from 2005 levels will be challenging. It will require innovation across several different industries important to Northern Colorado. The Governor's Climate Cabinet and the Colorado Energy Office believe these goals are achievable with existing cost-effective technologies, but will need to continue the transition to renewable energy, significantly expand adoption of electric cars, trucks, and buses, change transportation and land use to reduce the need to drive, expand building efficiency efforts and electrification of buildings, significantly reduce methane pollution from oil and gas production. I know Will's Colorado Energy Office has been busy this year developing the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap to meet some of these goals. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him first to outline that for us, and then we're going to have questions for all of our panelists today who are going to weigh in on these issues. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Will.
Great, thank you very much, and great to be able to join the panel this morning. I'm going to give just a very brief overview of the roadmap. The draft roadmap is out for public comment right now. The comment deadline is actually coming up in 2 days on November 12th. The full document is fairly extensive, about 170-page document, including the technical appendices, but I'll do my best to hit the highlights. Next slide, please. Could I get the next slide, please?
Looks like we may have to go a little off script. I'm not sure if our technology is working with us today.
Well, I'll just
give it a try.
I can just speak to it. There we are.
There we go.
So in 2019, there was a very active year at the legislature on clean energy and climate policy with 13 or 14 different pieces of legislation, depending how you count, in the realm of climate policy, clean energy, electric utility regulation, energy efficiency, and transportation electrification. But one of the most significant pieces of legislation was House Bill 1261, the Climate Action Plan to Reduce Pollution, that for the first time set legislatively adopted goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions that were really aligned with the levels that science tells us are needed in order to have a high probability of being able to maintain a stable climate with temperature increases, average global temperature increases above pre-industrial levels of under 2 degrees centigrade. And those goals are 26% below 2005 levels by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050. In response to the passage of the legislation, the governor asked the Energy Office to work with other agencies in a multi-agency effort to develop a roadmap for how we can achieve these goals going forward. And while the Energy Office led the effort, we worked very closely with CDOT, with the Department of Public Health and Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture. And there's been a pretty extensive public process over the last year with multiple public meetings and many stakeholder engagement meetings. From a emission sources perspective, while there are a wide variety of emission sources, the 4 largest sources have been relatively consistent over the last couple of decades. Transportation, electricity generation, emissions from the oil and gas supply chain, and emissions from heating buildings. And the biggest change is that electricity has been getting cleaner at a faster rate than the other sectors, so that transportation actually overtook electricity generation in the last couple of years as the largest source of emissions. Next slide, please. So at the same time that the agencies have been working on developing the roadmap, there has been ongoing work, much of it around implementing previous legislation to actually achieve emissions reduction. So we haven't been waiting for the roadmap to take action. Probably the biggest has been the action that is taking place at the utility level. I describe here as utility clean energy plans, but different utilities have different governance models and different mechanisms for adopting their plans. But what we've seen over the last year has been a remarkable activity by multiple utilities to retire older polluting plants and replace them with zero emission wind, solar, and storage. Most notably, Tri-State Generation and Transmission, the second largest utility in the state that provides electricity for most of the rural co-ops, announced their responsible energy plan that involves retiring uneconomic older coal plants and replacing them with primarily wind and solar. Their CEO, Dwayne Hiley, described this as a green dividend that is actually going to allow them to reduce their wholesale energy rates by about 8% over the next couple of years, but because the wind and solar is coming in at costs that are substantially lower than simply the costs of operating their existing plants. Another major focus has been on electrification of transportation. And just a couple of things of note. In 2019, the state adopted a zero emission vehicle standard that requires that auto manufacturers, the vehicles that they sell in Colorado, a certain percentage of them have to be electric or plug-in hybrid or hydrogen vehicles. That percentage grows over time from now through 2025. And notably, for actually the first time on any state in the nation, this was supported by the automobile manufacturing industry. And the final rule that was adopted was actually jointly submitted by CDOT, the Energy Office, and the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and Global Auto Alliance that together represent 99% of the vehicles sold in this country. also been action on continuing to adopt more advanced building codes. There's new appliance efficiency standards. And certainly there's been substantial action on continuing to reduce emissions from the oil and gas industry. Next, please. When we modeled out what does this all mean? Where does it take us in terms of emissions? You know, what we see is that we are on a trajectory of reduced pollution over time, but it's not fast enough to actually achieve the state's targets. What we're seeing is that under what I would describe as essentially the current trajectory, the 2019 action scenario in the middle there, we're on track to achieve about half the level of emissions reductions that would be required to meet the 2025 and 2030 targets. So sort of good work happening, but there is more that will need to be done. Next, please. And so, as Jamie mentioned, we see sort of 5 major areas where we are going to need to continue to make progress in order to be able to achieve the 2030 targets. Probably first and foremost is continuing that swift transition from fossil generation, really from legacy coal plants to renewable energy in the electric generating sector. And, based upon the plans that have been adopted by multiple utilities and a few additional plans that we're anticipating in the next year, we think that we are on track to achieve this level of reductions, which is actually an 80% pollution reduction from the utility sector compared to 2005. Another arena that will be important is transportation, continuing to accelerate the transition towards electric vehicles. And that includes not only cars, but over time, trucks and buses. I would note that this summer, the state launched a clean trucking stakeholder process in partnership with the Colorado Motor Carriers Association in order to explore a wide range of potential strategies for helping to clean up trucking. That's very important, not only because of the greenhouse gas emissions, but because they're a major source of both particulates and of nitrogen oxide, which contributes to the ozone problem that we have in the Front Range. Another area that will be important is continuing to accelerate improvements to both building energy efficiency and the electrification of buildings. What we've seen is that there's been substantial technical improvements in electric heat pumps, which is making it more and more practical and cost effective to use electric heat pumps for both water and space heating. Another really important area is reducing methane emissions. And this includes reducing methane emissions from the oil and gas industry, as well as from landfills, sewage treatment plants, and agricultural operations. I would note that with agriculture in particular, there are no recommendations for regulatory approach there. It would be purely incentive based. So for instance, there might be incentives for utilities to use what's known as renewable natural gas, biomethane, that could help create a market for things like methane capture from dairy farms. There is a recommendation for regulatory action in terms of the oil and gas industry. And in particular, the analysis suggested that emissions reductions of around 50% compared to 2005 levels should be possible by 2030. And the State Air Division is initiating a stakeholder engagement process to look at a potential rulemaking later in 2021. When we look out to 2050, the focus of the roadmap is primarily in what we should be doing today to reach the near-term targets, but it certainly becomes clear that all sectors will have a very important role to play to reach the 2050 goals. Final slide, please. And for folks who are interested in reading more about this, the entire draft roadmap is available on the Energy Office website, along with you can see the comments that we have received, all of the substantive comments. You can submit comments through November 12th through the website or emailing them to climatechange@state.co.us. And after the roadmap is finalized, there will be many opportunities to engage in particular implementation aspects of the roadmap. And many of those will, although not all, will happen through the Air Quality Control Commission, and you can get updates from the Air Pollution Control Division if you're interested in staying connected with those. And that's a quick summary.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Will. I want to go ahead and make sure, I'm going to come back to you with some questions here at the end, but I want to make sure to be able to offer our energy sector partners some contrasting opinions on the issues at hand and an ability to speak to those. And so I'm actually going to turn to Dan Haley next and ask him, what has the industry already done to meet these goals? I know in working with industry sector partners, they do talk about that often. And also, how will the climate change agenda and the pieces that Will's outlined impact oil and gas production in Colorado? So if I can turn that over to you, Dan.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate that. I think the previous panel I was on and listened, and you heard and saw the importance of oil and natural gas, particularly to the Larimer-Weld region and to the entire state. And so I think when we proceed down these types of paths, we need to do so cautiously, and we need to do so thinking about impacts to all Coloradans, not just to an industry per se, but to all of us in this state. And as you noted, there have been great gains made in this industry already. According to data at the Regional Air Quality Council for the non-attainment area, emissions of volatile organic compounds, those VOCs, have gone down by more than 50%, while production has quadrupled in Colorado over the past 10 years. So we're already seeing gains done out there through technology and innovation. I think it's important to note that we share in many ways the state's vision of lowering greenhouse gas emissions. But we think in order to achieve the right policy prescription or to achieve the right goals, it should involve a big tent approach that includes not just oil and gas, but other industries, other organizations, state officials, all coming to the table to figure out how we can do this in a cost-effective manner that benefits all Coloradans. And as you noted, this industry has been out front with some pretty aggressive measures to decrease emissions of methane, other pollutants. Our producers began adopting new technologies, low-emitting designs several years ago before they're required, including things like infrared camera inspections, on-site emissions monitoring, reducing the number of tanks that are storage tanks at well pads. And so that's brought those numbers down, those emission numbers down. How do you take now those gains and perhaps encourage more? How can you incentivize that? You heard Mr. Tour talking about incentives in other industries. Rather than top-down regulations, we would encourage state agencies to consider sort of those innovative greenhouse gas reduction strategies that prioritize innovation, incentives, flexibility. I think the first step would be a stakeholder process to identify possible emission reduction innovations that are happening out in the field, something that gives operators some flexibility to select a mix of strategies to help meet the challenges and produce those sort of, to help them meet their share of the emissions reductions. And I think as an industry of geologists, engineers, scientists, we are well suited to meet this challenge head on and produce some cost-effective strategies for consideration. Whether that's new tank controls, pipeline management, non-emitting pneumatics, utilization of electric drill rigs, pumps, closed loop systems, things like carbon capture are becoming more popular. All those different strategies are out there, but not all tools and technologies are universally appropriate, which is something else I think is important. So I hope when we walk through this process, the state understands that results matter more than regulations. By setting those performance-based standards, not mandating the use of specific technologies, we can really accelerate innovation and allow industry to succeed in ways that strengthens the economy and also protects the environment. And just one other question that you had, if I could just add one final point here. This industry is producing molecules cleaner, better, and safer than most anywhere in the country. And if you have policies well-intentioned or not, that begin to limit that local energy supply, you then begin increasing imports, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, and you're having the exact opposite effect of what you're trying to do. If you're trying to help a global issue through climate change, you need this product produced in Colorado, and you don't want us relying on this product being produced in countries that don't have the same environmental standards. Sorry, long answer to your question, Jamie.
No, thank you so much. I'll come back at the end here with a question for all of you. Appreciate your comments on the industry and the potential impacts, right, and moving ahead. I'm going to take it also a little closer to home here in Weld County and ask Barb Kirkmeyer, who I believe is on as well, if she could elaborate on what types of programs has Weld County implemented. I know Dan alluded to that as well, some of the changes in the industry to address climate change, and what are the anticipated costs of these strategies? How are you moving forward in those ways? So I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Barb if she's on. Not sure if I have Barb on.
She's on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to unmute me or if you guys, if Dan was going to do that. And so within Weld County, we work very diligently with the oil and gas industry. And since 2007, the industry has spent quite a bit of dollars in our county to ensure that they are dealing with the air quality issues. And, we've gone after and over the course of the last couple of years, hired our own air quality experts. And at one point even offered to the state that we would help them pay for things. So at this point, we are starting to put in new monitoring stations, again, working with the state so that we can truly identify what's going on in Weld County, how it's impacting, if it is impacting anyone else or any other area of the state. And, what we're doing to help eliminate any, problems with the air quality. So that's part of it. But, I'd like to kind of add on to what Dan was talking about a little bit and how this climate change agenda is impacting all Coloradoans. And I'm greatly concerned about the impact to those disproportionately impacted communities and citizens in the state of Colorado. The lower income population and rural Colorado, how are they going to be negatively impacted with this greenhouse gas roadmap? I mean, goals are nice. It's great. I mean, and I think we all can say that we share in the vision of reducing greenhouse gas emission. But what is severely lacking in this plan is basically that companion piece. When local governments, whether it's transportation, water, or sewer infrastructure, when we put that together, we also put together the companion piece on that, on how much is our infrastructure going to cost? And what does that mean to our families? The working poor, the people who can't afford to have increased water bills, or in this case, increased electrification bills. I don't know about you, but back in 2010, we had the whole clean energy economy plan put forward by Governor Ritter. And we were told then it wasn't going to cost you more money. Don't worry about it, consumers. We're going to take care of you. Well, you know what? We were left out in the cold, basically, with that plan. And I don't know about everybody else, but I'm a member of an REA, and my bill went up. I spend about $300 a month, and I'm a single family dwelling, basically. I'm the only person in my home. I spend about $300 a month trying to make sure that I can heat my home. So, there's a lot that goes on here, and I've asked Will Tour several times, where's the companion piece? Where is it? What is the capability of the infrastructure that we have in place? Who's done that study? Where is that at? What are the costs? Because we know it's not just going to be in hundreds of thousands. It will probably be in billions of dollars, the cost to build out the infrastructure. First, the transmission lines that are needed to carry all this electricity to get to a 90% reduction by 2050. There's no plan that says, here's the transmission lines and the capability and capacity that is needed to get to that. There's nothing that says, here's how much it's going to cost to you as the individual to get that to your home. Nobody's talking about that. We're not talking about how is this going to negatively impact our households and what are we going to do about that? I mean, again, we all share a vision. I testified in support of the clean energy economy back in 2010. Took a lot of criticism for it. But at the same time, understand that we've got to have clean air. That's extremely important to everybody. But at the same time, we've got to have some fairness in what this is going to cost our consumers and our businesses to be able to have this and try and meet this lofty goal that the legislature just put together. And we really don't know what it's based on. I mean, the 2005 number, is it a 2010 number? I mean, what are we trying to actually reduce here? And where is the plan for how we're going to deal with
making sure that our consumers can afford this and that we're not disproportionately impacting our low income population and our low income households. Because I don't know if y'all realize it or not, but I checked on the state demographer site, and there's about 1 million households in this state of Colorado that have less than a $50,000 annual income. So we need to start putting together the rest of the plan before we set out to just go off on our way and say we're going to get to this 30, 50, 90% reduction.
That actually leads me into my next question. Thank you for that, Barb.
Sure.
And that is back to Will. Will, is there legislation you intend to pursue? And then as a follow-up to that, back to Barb, as you head into the state legislature in January, what are some of the priorities associated with these reductions that you intend to pursue? So to Will first, is there legislation you intend to pursue? And then back to Barb, as you head into office, let us know maybe what you're thinking for the future. So Will, we'll turn it over to you next.
So right now, the agenda that is laid out in the roadmap, there are a set of near-term action recommendations, many of which could be pursued either legislatively or through sort of existing rulemaking authority. And I think it'll sort of shake out in the next months or so which ones that may move forward in legislation and which ones might move forward through rulemaking. I would say if you look at the roadmap, there are a number of proposals in the building energy efficiency space around expanding the energy efficiency programs that natural gas distribution utilities offer, expanding some of the programs that electric utilities offer to support things like heat pumps for their customers, as well as the potential of creating incentives for use of renewable natural gas. Those are things that could move through Public Utilities Commission. You potentially could imagine legislative strategies. At this point, I don't think that there are decisions made about exactly how those would move forward. In addition, there are a number of recommendations in the transportation arena that, again, I think could move forward administratively, or someone might propose legislation on that. It includes setting greenhouse gas pollution standards in the transportation sector, as well as exploring opportunities for additional investment to support the infrastructure that we're going to need for both light and heavy duty electrification.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you then, maybe Barb, for again, your opinion on what you'd like to move forward and see out of that.
Yeah, and thanks. And basically what I want to say is, come on, Will, we already know there's an electrification bill that's out there that people have already been working on with regard to introducing it as soon as January of this next year. So, and we also know that there's conversations and bills that are being looked at to be introduced with regard to land use and eliminating natural gas to homes and making everybody rely on electrification and electricity, which will probably just exacerbate the affordable housing issue that's going on in many of our communities across the state. So there's a lot of legislation that's out there that's been proposed. They were talking about it last year, had things proposed last year. They're just going to continue on, they meaning the Democrat side of this, and Will knows that. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to act like it's just going to be done through rulemaking, but there probably will be a lot of rulemaking that takes place as well. The things that I'm going to work on when this comes up and where I can help out is basically how are we going to make sure that it's fair to all consumers, that we aren't disproportionately impacting our low income areas or our rural areas of the state of Colorado, because that's the part that I am extremely concerned about. Again, it's nice to have lofty goals. I think everybody shares in the vision that we need to reduce greenhouse gas. What we don't all share in is that it's, you're just going to trust us and it's not going to cost us more money at the consumer rate or at the consumer household or me as a family or my children as families or anybody at that point. So I'm going to look at and require that, there needs to be the companion piece. There needs to be the study about how are we going to increase our capabilities and our capacity in electrification in this state. It's not just as simple as waving a magic wand. And I just want to make sure that no matter what plan we put forward and what rules we put forward, that we're not essentially going to leave people in the dark and have rolling brownouts or blackouts like they are in California. because unlike California, in Colorado, we have a lot of snow here, and we don't want to leave people in the cold and make them get to a point where they're trying to decide between heating their homes or putting food on the table.
I'm actually going to end with a question that yeah, go ahead, Will, if you ever.
Oh, I just wanted to note on the electric side that I think that from the state agency perspective, we very much share the sense that both affordability and reliability are extremely important. And the decisions that are made about the resource mixes are made by each individual utility, some through their city councils of their municipal utilities, through the Public Utilities Commission for the investor-owned utilities. Decisions are made by the co-op board for Tri-State. And what we're seeing is that in each case, there's very careful consideration of affordability and reliability. That's really why we're on the pathway that we are on, which is not towards 100% zero carbon by 2030. For some utilities, it's quite deep. Platte River Power Association recently adopted a plan to get to about a 90% reduction by 2030 while maintaining affordable, reliable electricity. Tri-State, came up with a plan that will reduce in-state emissions by 90% while reducing electric rates by 8%. So what we're seeing is that in practice, because the costs of wind and solar have come down so much and are lower costs to build new wind and solar than to operate existing coal plants, that the economics is really very well aligned to allow substantial pollution reduction from electricity generation, all without jeopardizing reliability or affordability.
So Will, on your final comment, I want to offer an opportunity maybe for Dan, Barb, and then yourself to give comment on this final question, and also on the last, if there's something you'd like to add. The roadmap mentions meeting these goals will diversify and strengthen our economy. It will create good paying local jobs. Can you expand on how this looks in terms of actual projections and how jobs from current sectors could be transferred to other industries? I know that's a hot topic. I'll go ahead and start with you, Dan, because you may have wanted to comment on the last, then Barb, and then Will, and then I think we're going to have to wrap today. So one final question to you all. Dan, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
I'm not sure I understood the question fully, but I don't believe the jobs are transferable. I don't think you're going to create renewable jobs that pay and have the impact that the oil and gas jobs do. And I want to make a point about California. As we watch policies imported from California, let's look and see what the impact is in California. Their production has decreased. Oil and gas production has decreased. Their fuel costs and their home heating costs are up. And so it's important to watch what's happening and see the practical implications of that. I also want to talk about trade-offs briefly. All energy has trade-offs. And that's the discussion we should be having. I appreciate the need for more electric vehicles, but to create a 1,000-pound electric battery takes 500,000 pounds of raw materials that's resourced from some other place on Earth, and I can't imagine that is done without emissions. So what are we trading off here by trying to limit fossil fuels, by trying to limit natural gas? It's important that we have these discussions. To create photovoltaic cells, to create wind turbines, you need oil and gas. Again, a product that we should be producing and should want to produce here in Colorado under these very tough standards that have been developed by the state, under the innovation and technology that's been happening out in the field. I feel like we've got a good story to tell. Natural gas is reducing our emissions. We're meeting environmental benchmarks. Other economies across the world, they belong to the Kyoto Protocol. They belong to the Paris Agreement. They're not doing the same things that we're doing here with free market innovation, with the tough rules that we have here in Colorado. I think we've got a good story to tell. I want to make sure when we walk down this path that we're doing it smartly, that we're talking about trade-offs, and we're talking about all Coloradans in this process. Thank you.
Dan, thanks for representing the industry. Barb, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you next, and then finally Will, and then we'll get back to our next programming. So Barb, your turn.
All right, well, thank you. And I'm not sure what the question was at this point, so I'm just going to say one more comment. And here's the part in Will County that we didn't understand, and I tried to express this I think I got 2 minutes at the public hearing to talk about our concerns with regard to the roadmap. But here's the part that we don't truly understand is that the roadmap for transforming our economy in pursuit of greenhouse gas emission reductions is based on a single proprietary model. We don't understand why the firm that was contracted and engaged, that their model wasn't validated or peer reviewed. And we don't understand why, or, it's not that we don't understand, but why isn't the roadmap, we believe it's deserving of a more robust analysis of additional alternatives, as Dan was talking about, using other proven non-proprietary models. I think there are some great disruptions. There are some great inequities here in this plan that's been put forward. And I think it's nice to talk about the new technologies that have been put in place with regard to wind and solar. There's new technologies with regard to oil and gas. That's great. We all rely on those and we want those. But the reality is that new technology and that it's cost, it's going to be less cost to the consumer, that no one has proved that up. And I've been asking for at least the last 6 months, where's the plan? Where is the proof that shows that our consumers, that those disproportionately low-income communities, that rural Colorado isn't going to have to bear the brunt of this once again, because the state has these great ideas and these lofty goals that they can't prove up.
Thanks, Barb, for your comments as well. Looks like we have U.S. Senator Michael Bennet on the line, so I'll leave it back to you, Will, for just some brief final comments, and then we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Sandra.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I think I would just leave it that clearly there's a wide variety of perspectives on the best way to move forward. I do think that it is a really sort of wonderful thing that there's as much consensus as there is on the goals that I think I'm hearing everybody saying that we want to work together to reduce pollution going forward, and would just invite everybody to remain engaged in the process. While the comment period on the roadmap will wrap up in a couple of days, the roadmap doesn't magically make anything happen. Anything that moves forward is going to move forward through administrative, regulatory, or legislative proposals going forward, and we would love to keep up the dialogue and remain engaged as we move towards actual implementation. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate everyone participating in our panel today, and want to continue to ask everyone to voice, again, the importance of the energy sector to the Northern Colorado region. I'd like to go ahead and turn it back over to Sandra. Thanks for joining us today, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandra, we're going to have you restart. We can't hear you.
Oh,
there we go. So, Sandra, are you going to introduce Senator Bennet, or do you want me to?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Very good.
Great. Thank you so much, Will, Barb, and Dan. As mentioned, the energy sector is so important, and this conversation around greenhouse gas is really critical, and we appreciate the visioning that Will and his team have done, and we look forward to continued engagement with him on this important topic. We are joined by U.S. Senator Michael Bennet, who is going to share some perspectives on the federal side, and of course that is such an integral component of our economic recovery and the dynamics that are occurring at the federal level in those important conversations. So we're thrilled to be joined by him. You all know him, but just because I want to make sure those who are on the phone are familiar with his background, he's represented us since 2009 in the U.S. Senate. He's widely recognized as a pragmatic and independent thinker. He is driven by a deep-seated obligation to create more opportunity for the next generation. He's built a wonderful reputation of taking on Washington dysfunction and working with Republicans and Democrats to address our nation's greatest challenges, including education, climate change, immigration, healthcare, and national security. I have personally found him to be just that, very cognizant of the ability and the opportunity to work collaboratively with on both sides of the aisle, and we're fortunate to have him as our senator. And so with that, Senator Bennet, I will hand it off to you, and then for a couple minutes of remarks, and then we'll talk about a few other issues.
Thanks, Sandra. It's nice to see you, and
good to see you too.
I really appreciate that introduction, and I hope that everybody is staying safe. It's really important. We've started, as everybody on this call knows, to see a spike in our cases in Colorado, and I over the summer was constantly yelling at my own television set as I heard talking heads saying, you know, we ought to choose between the economy opening and keeping everybody safe. And I think the reality is that they're completely intertwined with each other. The reality is that if we don't figure out a way to manage the virus, it's going to manage us, and our economy is going to continue to open and close and open and close. And I think the American people and Coloradans need something better than that. And that's what we're going to try to do now that the election is over, now that we're on the back end of that, now that it's become clear that when you look at the broad election results, our country remains deeply divided, at least politically, in terms of the leadership it's sending to Washington, D.C. And that makes it hard to address the challenges that we're facing if we're not willing to work together. You know, I heard a little bit of the discussion before I got on the phone or on the Zoom call, and it just is a reflection of a reminder of who we are as Americans. We're living in a country where we're not supposed to necessarily agree with each other. You know, the founders of this country didn't expect that we would agree with each other, and I don't. When I get up in the morning, I don't get out of bed thinking everybody's going to agree with me. I think people are going to disagree with me. But the idea is, out of those disagreements, can we create a more imaginative and more durable solution than any king or tyrant could come up with on their own through the exchange of views and through debate? And we've lost that, you know, in our national politics. We have to find a way to regain it. And when we've got a moment of divided government, as we do, that's the moment when it's particularly important for us to figure out how to do it. And let me just say a word about COVID and the COVID package, and then I'll stop and see whatever questions or criticisms or observations people have. You know, I hope that we can do some good bipartisan work right now to pass a COVID package in the lame duck session. We should have done it before we went into the election. And in my mind, it ought to contain 4 elements. One, first, we need to ramp up our public health capacity. I hear that from our public health folks all over the state. We've got to expand testing. We've got to do contact tracing. We need to make sure we're funding the infrastructure that's going to be required for us to deploy a vaccine. And we are not there yet. And unless we have that, it's going to make it very difficult for our businesses and our schools to stay open. Second, I think we need to continue to provide direct and substantial assistance to people and families who have suffered the most. And we're seeing some bipartisan discussion about that. Mitt Romney and I have an expanded child tax credit that would be extremely helpful. And he talked about that over the weekend as one of the things that he thought President Biden could get done. Third, more aid to our state and local governments, because we're going to see layoffs here if we don't do something. That's going to compound the economic difficulties that we face. And then lastly, we need to provide more support to our hardest hit small and mid-sized businesses. On that front, I've been working since May with Senator Todd Young of Indiana, a Republican, to build support for our Restart Act. It's the only bipartisan bill related to small business. We now have 57 Senate co-sponsors, Democrats and Republicans, that would help our hardest hit businesses like restaurants, breweries, salons, hotels, gyms, concert venues, movie theaters, and seasonal sectors that are so important to Colorado's tourism sector. Help these companies get the working capital they need for the next 6 months so that millions of them don't go out of business across the country. So that's there, Sandra. I'm going to stop there, I think, in the interest of time. Thank you for having me. And I'm, again, happy to take any questions on any topic. Don't feel the need to restrict yourself to what I talked about.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate those remarks. And yeah, you have a big job ahead of you as you head back during the lame duck session to talk about additional stimulus. We as an organization, as you well know, have been working tirelessly on transportation and infrastructure funding. And curious your thoughts if there might be something built into this next round or what you see into the next Congress around infrastructure.
Yeah, I think I think unlikely that it will be part of what we do in the lame duck, but I do believe that it is the likeliest place for an early administration to have bipartisan success. You know, everybody in Washington says they want to do an infrastructure bill except Mitch McConnell. And it would seem to me that he shouldn't have a veto on this. And Republicans and Democrats coming together in the House and the Senate ought to be able to do something on infrastructure. And I have become particularly interested in it, not just for all the reasons that we historically have been, or that you in Northern Colorado have been and that we've worked together on I-25 and other things, but I have come to see our national forests as part of this puzzle as well. When you see the fires that have occurred in this summer, 3 of the worst in the history of Colorado, and the people for 10 years up there have been saying to me, Michael, this is going to happen. Michael, this is going to happen. And we have not invested the resources that we should have to do the forest management that can protect our communities and can address, the changing climate. So I think there's an opportunity there as well to build a coalition across the West in an infrastructure bill that focuses on protecting our critical watersheds and national forests.
Great point. Great point about that being a component of the larger infrastructure conversation. And we do greatly appreciate all the work you've done for the highways and roadways in our state, for sure. Shifting real quickly to the previous conversation around the climate agenda, you've heard, the state is elevating that discussion here through the greenhouse gas reduction roadmap, a lot of conversation at the federal level around what may come forward, and loomed large during the election. What are you envisioning or expecting to see come January on that front, on the climate change front, whether the Green New Deal is put forward? Your thoughts on that? Can you hear me? Oh, Senator? I think the senator is frozen a second there. Okay. Well, if he is unable to join us, we will shift. I'm so sorry that we seem to have him frozen at the moment. With that, that complication, why don't we shift real quickly into transportation?
Sandra, this is Steve.
Yes.
Can I interject?
Sure.
There's a really good article in today's Denver Post about Senator-elect Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett and the likelihood of how well they will cooperate. I think one thing that excites me about these two senators is they're both extremely successful businessmen, and they'll have that businessman approach, I hope, on many issues. And
Hey guys. Sandra, it's Michael. I'm sorry I switched off.
No, it's fine. You're fine. My apologies. Steve Toole, our chair, was just commenting on the article in the Denver Post about the relationship you and Senator-elect Hickenlooper have had in the past and are anticipated to have in the future. And I would agree that we're excited to see that working relationship unfold. I was just asking in our remaining couple of minutes, your thoughts on what the prospects for the green energy plan that has been large part of the conversation during the election, and what that might look like, again, in a potentially divided government. What does that look like, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I really hope that Donald Trump is the last climate denier we'll ever have occupy the White House, because we've lost a lot of ground. We've wasted a lot of time because of his, I'm not even sure ideological commitment is the right way to say it, but because he believed that people that believed the climate change was real didn't support him, he wasn't interested in dealing with it. And, we are facing competition all over the world from the Chinese and others who are, even though they're consuming a lot of coal, who are racing ahead to claim clean energy technology. Let me give one example. The battery technology that was mentioned earlier, Dan Haley mentioned it. We've got a decision to make whether we want to own those batteries or whether we're going to let China own those batteries. In Fort Collins, in your backyard, there is the headquarters of what is the company? The Waterpick. And the water picks aren't manufactured in the United States. Why not? Because the battery technology is all manufactured in China. That's where the supply chain is. That's where all the jobs are. We don't want that to happen with clean energy, I don't think. And so my hope is that we work quickly together to create a legislation, not the final piece of legislation, but some legislation, maybe as part of the infrastructure bill we mentioned earlier, that can help us get a head start on clean energy technology, clean energy jobs, as we did in the 09 recovery package. You know, what's left of the Obama climate legacy is the stuff that we passed as part of that package. And that's been enormously helpful to the state of Colorado. It produced a lot of jobs. It produced a lot of hope in rural communities that we can create more diversity in our economy. And so I think it's very likely that we're going to be able to do it if those of us that are proponents of the bill can make the case to the American people that it's a jobs creator, not a jobs destroyer. And I think we can make that case, but we can't assume that people understand that. We're going to have to do hard work that we historically, I think, have overlooked. So that's my hope and my candid answer.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that insight. And as you heard in the last session, certainly Northern Colorado will be watching those not only watching, engaging in those conversations actively because of the importance of the sector and the agriculture industry. I mean, the full gamut of sectors in our region are directly tied to that conversation. So we'll be fully engaged with you.
Sandra, I know you're going to kick me off of here, but just on ag, because I think that's such an important point. I ran a very unnoticed campaign for president last time, but I put a platform together, and which I encourage you guys to look at. It included the idea that agriculture needs to be central to our solution on climate change. And we can provide, I think, extraordinary incentives around soil health and around water that would be very appealing to farmers and ranchers across the country and in our state as part of a climate package. And that is a way of thinking about how you create an enduring solution on climate. We used to have something called American foreign policy, which whether you were a Democratic or Republican president, you knew what your job was with respect to the Soviet Union and the Cold War, you know, no matter what party you're in. And I think we need to get to something called American climate policy, because the next generation of Americans needs us to do more than just have a political fight about this. They need us to create a durable solution they can inherit. And that I think will only come with a bipartisan result.
Yeah, no, great. We'll make sure we attach that your plan in and among the materials when we conclude all of this. So thank you for joining us today. And I think
sorry about the technological.
No, it's fine. I would just comment, I think that your approach and your bipartisan sort of view of how things work could probably, the timing of that could not be better given what we're anticipating in terms of, or the likelihood of a divided government. So look forward to
Sandra.
Work. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. See you soon, I hope.
Thank you. I'll be passing it off to Steve to introduce our transportation panel.
So I'm going to introduce the transportation panel, but before I do that, I want to acknowledge David May. This is probably our last opportunity in this session or in this summit to do that. As many of us know, David May is leaving the Fort Collins Chamber of Commerce after 17 and a half wonderful years as our president and CEO. David is just an exceptional executive. He was a Chamber Executive of the Year in Missouri in his younger days, and then Florida, and then Colorado, and then the Western U.S. Chamber Executive of the Year. His leadership of Northern Colorado, Fix Colorado Roads, Northern Colorado Prospers, Fix I-25, Reigniting Our Economy have been spectacular. Under his leadership, the Fort Collins Chamber of Commerce is the only 5-star chamber in Colorado. So with that, David, I'm introducing you. We're saying goodbye to you in a way, although we know you're staying in the area and you're going to stick around and help us out. But with that, I'll turn the transportation Peace over to you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the kind remarks. I really appreciate it. So this panel is on transportation, and let me very quickly, to catch up a little bit of time, run through these fairly fast. But NCLA has made this a priority for a period of years. The basic goal that we have is to secure the funding to get I-25 widened to 3 lanes each way between Highway 14 in Fort Collins to Highway 66 north of Longmont, and have that money in place by 2025. And you can see a variety of elements to that. You'll also notice the last bullet point here. We talk about the fact that while we're focused on I-25, we know we've got some regional and secondary roads that need attention as well. So the panel we're going to have today, I'm going to make a few introductory remarks, and then Shoshana Liu, the Executive Director for CDOT, is joining us today, and then Greg Fulton, the President of the Colorado Motor Carriers Association. This data is from Common Sense Institute. If you're not familiar with them, you may want to check them out. And this is a study they produced in July. And what's important here is you can see the trend lines in terms of vehicle miles traveled, which is the green line here. You can see the blue line, which is population. And this is over a 15-year window from around 2001 to 2015. But then this orange line is the money shot. And this is the one where you basically show we're not adding any lane mile capacity into the state of Colorado. So another chart from them shows this in a financial sense, where you see the HUTF population and construction index is the orange line, and then the actual collections is this blue line. And so there is a funding gap in this state that we all are aware of, and it's a major challenge. What does that do for North I-25? Obviously, we feel that situation. We do not have the funds to get I-25 widened completely, or haven't had. And when you look at the cement that's out there, until the climbing lane was built on Berthoud Hill a few years ago, that's the first time any capacity has been added to North I-25. That there's 3 years more of dollars in the pipeline, and after that, we don't have any funding in place. We've catalyzed these dollars. You can see basically here on this chart how this lays out over a period of time, the funding that I mentioned, but it's been consistent work by a lot of people at the federal, state, and local community level to make this happen, and that's what it requires, that kind of consistent effort. One of the things that we figured out early on in our process is if we're going to help the state fix its problem, we're going to have to, or fix our problem on I-25, we're going to have to help them fix their funding problem. So we've been very focused on helping the state. We created a group called Fix Colorado Roads. It's been advocating for state funding. We've been very persistent in supporting this effort for the state of Colorado. It's generated about $3.75 billion in general funds or finance dollars over the past 6 years. And we've been very consistent in being an advocate of the legislature using some of their general fund dollars for transportation. This is where that $3.75 billion has come from. And again, this is Fix North I-25, Fix Colorado Roads. The I-25 Coalition have really made state transportation funding a priority, because we knew that we couldn't get what we needed without helping the state address its challenge. The future, we're looking at general fund monies, stay focused there, identify any financially and politically viable new revenue streams. Electric vehicles are increasingly popular, but they are not paying their way, and yet they're pounding the roads like the rest of us. Look at gas tax, other funding sources. Sandra just asked about the federal infrastructure funding. And so hopefully there's a bill that will be coming out of Congress in 2021. Don't let the express toll lanes be used free by electric vehicles. And that's not about being anti-electric vehicle. It's just conflicting priorities. The priority here is to make sure that we are keeping the capacity for toll lanes. We've got guaranteed travel times. We may need to look at local funding options like RTAs, bonding, and so on. Key point here is we're not done. We still need $450 to $650 million for North I-25, and we need to stay focused on this challenge. This is definitely a team sport. There are a lot of people that deserve a lot of credit. I don't have time to share all their names today, but really appreciate the leadership in Northern Colorado from our local government officials. We've had a great partnership with CDOT and others around the state. And we've got three of those. We got two panelists with us today that have been partners of ours in this effort as well. And one of them is Shoshana Liu. Shoshana is the executive director of CDOT, and Greg Fulton, who is the president of the Colorado Motor Carriers. And I want to introduce, as I tee them up, I want to have them address a couple of things. You know, what's next and how do we get I-25 funded is obviously on my mind. And that gets to the larger funding issue in the state. This discussion we just had about electrification and the carrier industry, what does that mean to Colorado? So starting out, Shoshana Liu was appointed executive director of CDOT in December of 2018. Prior to that, she was the chief operating officer of the Rhode Island Department of Transportation and chief financial officer and assistant secretary for budget and programs for the U.S. Department of Transportation, among other duties there. She's a graduate of Harvard and Northwestern University, and she's worked in a variety of other roles in the federal government. Greg Fulton is the president of the Colorado Motor Carriers, which is an organization of 650 companies either directly involved in trucking or are affiliated to trucking. And Greg has been the executive director for that association for 17 years, and he has been a trusted partner of ours in this whole issue of funding for transportation. So I'm going to turn it over to Director Liu.
Thank you, David. And first, I would just like to add to the chorus of thanks to you for everything. And I know I haven't worked with you for quite as long as many of the people in this virtual room, but it's really been a pleasure. And we'll miss you when you make your transition, and hope we'll all find ways to continue collaborating.
Thank you.
Just a quick word of introduction, and I know we want to spend most of the time today doing a dialogue back and forth with you and Greg. You know, I think this is such a kind of fitting time to be having this conversation about transportation and about how we make the investments that we need, you know, for our economy and for the movement across Colorado. You know, I think when we entered into this economically challenging time that you've heard much about today, you know, everyone here knew that transportation was an important part of how we make the economy move. But I think we've only seen those patterns sort of come to fruition and clarity, you know, in an even more pronounced way over the course of the recession over the past couple of months. You know, I think it's fitting to be here with my colleague Greg, because one of the things that the world has seen is just how central trucking is to every aspect of our lives. You know, look no further than the Amazon Prime truck in front of one's home to sort of see that the shape of retail is changing and that the freight economy is, you know, growing but evolving in different ways, where, you know, we have an opportunity in Colorado to, you know, be leaders in that space and be ahead of thinking through, you know, what a real 21st century freight economy looks like. You know, our roads are a big part of that, because whether it is single occupancy travel, electric vehicles, conventional vehicles, trucks, cars, you know, they all use the roads, and we need that strong foundation in order to have the system that we all rely on. You know, I think something else that we've seen, and this touches on a point that Senator Bennett made in his remarks, is that I think we've all seen the kind of clarity with which our transportation infrastructure and our natural resources come together over these past months. You know, in the governor's budget that was released last week, there's a stimulus package that you'll doubtless hear more about over the course of today, but you know, one of the central elements of that was a proposed $220 million investment in infrastructure, of which the majority is transportation, but it also includes infrastructure for our parks. And I think it's so fitting that those two things fit together, because the system, you know, of roads that we have, you know, is central to everything about our way of life, but especially in this time where, you know, the outdoors is so much the way that, we're continuing to move during COVID, that we've seen pressures on rural roads that never had that kind of pressure before. So, I think the focus in our 10-year plan on a whole transportation system for Colorado, both the interstates and the major arteries of the Front Range, but also the system of rural roads across the state that we rely on for freight and for recreation and for the tourism economy that's such a important part of our state. I think the relevance of that has also become even clearer during this time. I will turn it back to you, and knowing that Greg probably has some remarks as well.
Great, thank you, Director Liu. So we'll now turn over to Greg.
Thank you very much, David. I want to echo, what others have said. I think I've worked with you for several years, and I've got to tell you, you truly are an outstanding, association exec and a leader, and have been a champion in this transportation issue. I just want to thank you. I also want to end up, thanking my old friend, Representative Steve Toole, actually. And Steve, I worked with one of the probably best legislators that I've ever worked with down at the legislature. And somebody who's been a great advocate. And also thank you to Sandra. She's a great voice for you in terms of the NCLA, and she does a terrific job. She's been carrying a lot of water. Let me note that I would just mention in terms of our end of it, and can I just share a slide here, David? Is that all right? Oh,
I believe you can.
Okay, and I'm just going to do this right now. I'm just going to end up sharing just, if I can find my end of it there, let me do this. This is it. Okay, I'm just going to share this one. And I don't know how I can structure that, but I don't want to be blocking out the whole screen there, but I'm not very good at doing this sort of thing. Okay. I do want to mention that, we've all recognized as Director Lou, and it's always great to share the, sort of, I guess, the screen these days with Director Lou. She's done a terrific job at CDOT. She's the only director that I know that has visited every county, and she's worked closely with us in our industry towards solving a lot of the problems. And I think, we're very fortunate to have her, and, hoping that she'll stay with us. I'll just say that too. When there's appeals or whatever come forward on that. But
so Greg, sorry to interrupt you, but are you sharing your screen?
I am actually, but it doesn't seem to be. Okay, let me do that. Sure. Okay, let me do this. Is that there? Is it showing now, David?
There you go. You got it.
Okay,
yep.
Great. Sorry about that. Okay, I would just say that when we talk about the impact of this, this just is, we're going to even see this even more, because in the last few months since this pandemic, we've all become so much more dependent on home deliveries and the trucking industry out there. Even today, right now, you're probably starting to hear again that we tend to end up having people going into a panic mode, which means that, the great toilet paper shortage of 2020 is coming back to us, along with the Clorox self-wipes and things like that. Those items are there. We don't really have a shortage. We have a shortage of the ability to move that, enough product fast enough in this environment. But a part of that is really the infrastructure that we have. It's an aging infrastructure. It costs us millions of dollars in additional costs every day due to the congestion. And not only due to the congestion, but also when we have bridges that are not actually up to par in terms of structurally, or they can't bear the weight on this because they've deteriorated. Roadways where we end up even actually having lanes where trucks can't go on because they're so deteriorated. And even the challenge of actually maintaining this network and actually having enough people and equipment actually to plow our highways and other things. I think CDOT's done an outstanding job, and Director Lou is to be commended, but you can only do so much without having enough money. Yes. I think maybe David pointed to this, but this really echoes it. And I will say, like a great phrase that previous director Shailen Bhatt had mentioned. He said, we've got a great highway network for 3 million people. And he said, then he went on to say, the problem is we've got over 5 million people. And so the thing here is, as you've seen, we have not stayed current. And I-25 North is a testament to that. And so I would just kind of echo the need for this. I would say that, Sandra and us and the NCLA group have looked at different ideas. We have been supportive of fuel tax or some sort of, fee in lieu of that could be applied to fuel as a surrogate in this environment. We've also encouraged looking at what we said, the specific ownership tax, which is was last changed in 1975 and doesn't adequately reflect actually in terms of the base of vehicles that we have. And we think that's an opportunity as well. And I would share the mention that David mentioned is that electric vehicles, and we'll be looking at a lot of electric vehicles in our industry as well in the future. Right now, they're not contributing to the highway user tax fund, and it's critical that they become a part of that as well. So I'll leave it at that, David, and move on. I mean, I'm happy to talk. I even have some slides on the electric vehicles and other things if you'd like, but I'll throw it back to you if that's all right.
Great, Greg. Thank you very much. Thanks for your kind comments as well. So we're a little behind schedule, but maybe as you unshare your slide there, Greg, thank you. We'll have, let me just put this question in front of you and you, Director Liu, which is, what's it going to take to fund Colorado highways? And it's a large question, I understand, but maybe we can talk about what are our options maybe for 2021 in a really tough environment, economic environment. So maybe Director Liu, we could start with you. How are we going to fund our highways?
Sure, and it's a multivariable question with a lot of parts, as you know. I continue to think that the first prerequisite to having a good plan to fund the highways is to have a good plan, right? To have a tight plan and to be able to be disciplined about what our priorities are and how to kind of keep our eye on the ball, whether it's for an I-25, a Floyd Hill, a 270, or the vast network of rural roads across the state that is badly in need of being sort of brought up to modern conditions. So that's why we spent really the first year plus of my time here working with folks across the state to develop, a 10-year plan that doesn't do everything, but that has a discrete set of projects that will make a big difference. I-25 is the single largest investment in that plan. In order to be able to know what we're focused on and to be able to talk to day-to-day people about the results. I think that in terms of this year and the years beyond, thinking through both what we can do in the immediate term, and that's where the conversation about stimulus has the opportunity to be a shot in the arm, but also how we stabilize our revenue structure moving forward. So that, as to your point, we get to a space where there's a more broader balance between electric and conventional vehicles. We're talking about a revenue stream that captures those funds. So that as we talk about new technologies using the roads, we're in a space where applications of technology we haven't thought of are sort of paying into the system for the impact that they have. But in the immediate term, I think that really honing in on this opportunity to explain to people how transportation both is stimulative unto itself and also sets a foundation for future growth is a big part of the narrative right now. And that's something that we've been focused on throughout this crisis, is helping to take all of the work that we've done up until COVID and really translate it for the moment that we're in, that it's not just still important, but even more important.
Thank you. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, David. I think Director Liu hit a lot of the points. I would say the real key here is, we start out with, I think everybody in the legislature realizing that we need additional funding. And the real question then comes down to, okay, where is that going to come from? Secondly, some question whether we need new funding whatsoever. Others are saying, okay, how those funds are spent. I think we need to keep this simple. First off, I think, because we need consensus. It needs to be a bipartisan bill. Secondly, I think, things like you keep off the table is you keep the existing funding formula between the state and the city and counties the same, as so is how those funds are allocated. I think third is the point that you agree that we have a statewide transportation plan. We don't try to add certain things, and we tie actually the fact in terms of the funding, saying that this is going to actually be put toward those projects. I think the fourth element is we've got to be reasonable, particularly in these times. I do believe we can get a funding package through there, but it's going to be something that is going to be a huge package. It's going to be something that needs to grow over time, but it has to look at the technologies as we move forward. If we're going to have EVs and other elements and other newer technologies out there, we need to account for those and actually build them into that overall package. But simplicity, focus, and actually agreeing that we do need additional funds coming into the system that'll be dedicated there is, I think, critical. And I think the last piece is I do think everyone's saying we need to have skin in the game. The state legislature and the state government's going to have to end up, we think, having some state funding be part of that contribution, which, and I mean by state funding, and I mean some general fund monies to kind of end up helping to, make up that difference. So that's part of my view. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So Director Liu, final question for you. Is there any chance, in your opinion, that we'll get to the spot where we're taking money away from highways to fund rail? Is that remotely a threat?
I think the conversation about Front Range Rail is very separate from the conversation about the basis of our 10-year plan. I don't think anyone thinks that the funds for the basic transportation program should be on the table. And I think that the way that we constructed our 10-year plan, makes them very separate, right? There are related policy questions. How we use a reconstructed I-25 is, related to having more options for transportation. In our 10-year plan, for example, we proposed using some of the multimodal options fund elements to do, bus rapid transit along I-25 North, much like we've seen great success with on US 36. That's separate, but also, sort of conceptually related to the broader conversation, about what a Front Range Rail corridor could look like. But, in the planning that is happening for what the Front Range Rail corridor could look like, all presumes that there would be a vote of the people specifically related to the funding for that project. So, I don't think that they're in direct competition in that way.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Well, I'll wrap this up, and I'll just say thank you to both of you. And we've been very fortunate. We've been very fortunate in our. We've been very fortunate in having both of you as leaders in our state and advocates for transportation. I know as I look back over the last few years, just a chance to work with both of you has been a real pleasure, and we really appreciate you both. And so from our audience perspective, just stay focused on transportation. It's a huge issue for us, and NCLA is committed to this, and we appreciate your help when we put out a call for action to contact your legislators and others. And I'm going to turn back over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Greg and Shoshana. And Greg, thanks for the nice comments you made about me. I appreciate it. Our next item on the agenda is the introduction of Congressman Joe Neguse. Are we ready for that? I assume we are. Joining us now is Congressman Joe Neguse. Congressman Neguse represents Colorado's 2nd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He previously was elected in 2008 as a CU regent and was in that position from 2008 to 2015. He then was appointed Executive Director of the Department of Regulatory Agencies in 2015 and served for 2 years. He was elected to his first term in to the House of Representatives in November of 2018, becoming the first African American member of Congress in Colorado history. He serves as a member of the House Judiciary Committee, House Natural Resources Committee, and the House Select Committee on the climate crisis. Please welcome Representative Joe Neguse, and Congressman, congratulations on your reelection.
Well, thank you, Steve, for the very kind words. Appreciate it. And thank you for hosting me this morning, and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all about the road ahead and what we hope to accomplish in the 117th Congress. As was mentioned, I represent the 2nd District, which of course includes all of Larimer County, as well as our Central Mountain communities, most of Boulder County, and Broomfield as well. And suffice to say, there will be no shortage of challenges that we'll need to address as a Congress and as a country in the months and years ahead. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to do that with our reelection last week, and to continue to serve the people of Northern Colorado in the United States Congress. Just to kind of give you a sense of what I think is to come in the next year, obviously we're all well aware of the electoral outcomes, and I do think that what's most likely, the most likely scenario is a Republican Senate with a Democratic president in President-elect Joe Biden, and a Democratic House. Obviously, there are still a number of House races that remain uncalled. The Democratic majority lost several seats this cycle. And of course, in the Senate, we have 2 outstanding runoff races in the state of Georgia, which will take place in another 8 weeks, notwithstanding I know that none of us wish to have yet another election after going through a brutal election season this year. But in any event, I think conventional wisdom, at least as far as I can tell, and as the current, irrespective of what may happen in the next few weeks, right now we have a Republican Senate, a Democratic president, a Democratic House. And I think, in my view, we're going to have to work incredibly hard to try to build consensus and try to establish agreement with divided government in Washington, D.C. around a shared sense of American values and priorities that I do think resonate with most people in our country, certainly most people in our state. When I think about what that agenda would look like in the coming Congress, in some respects, it I think comports really well with your legislative priorities as I've reviewed them, and as we've had a chance to discuss those priorities in the past. That includes transportation and infrastructure funding. I had an opportunity to catch the tail end of the prior panel with several people whom I've had the privilege of working with, Greg Fulton, when I was running DORA, which includes, of course, the Public Utilities Commission, and of course, Shoshana Liu, who's a dear friend, and I've worked closely with her as the executive director of CDOT. I think that infrastructure funding happens to be one of these areas that, generally speaking, folks on both the right and the left would like to see the Congress accomplish. And yet, for a variety of different reasons, we've been unable to do that in the last Congress. I'm hopeful that in the next Congress, President-elect Biden has talked about his Build Back Better plan, and I think that plan largely encompasses much of what the House has already pursued in the 116th Congress, the Moving America Forward Act, which included a significant investment in rebuilding crumbling infrastructure around the country, roads, bridges, highways. I think the funding in that bill would certainly have inured to the benefit of the people of Northern Colorado as we think about widening the lanes on I-25. And while I am grateful for all of the work that our local governments have done and local communities have done in Weld County and in Larimer County, working in tandem with state officials and our county commissioners, the truth of the matter is that federal investment has to be brought to bear. Now, local governments should not have to be shouldering this alone, nor should local taxpayers. So I'm hopeful that infrastructure will be at the very top of our agenda, and that is something that we could hopefully accomplish within the first 100 days of the 117th Congress. It's certainly going to be a top priority of mine, and I will be articulating the same to Democratic leadership in the House. In addition, of course, the perhaps more pressing short-term need that I know you all are well familiar with is the need to get a handle on the coronavirus pandemic, and both in terms of the public health risks that it has created. And of course, here in Colorado, we're no exception to that rule. We've seen the contagion spreading over the course of the last several weeks in particular to incredibly high rates that are almost as high as when the virus was at its peak earlier this year in April and March during the shutdowns, as we all recall. And then the economic fallout. And I visited with countless businesses in Fort Collins, in Loveland, in Windsor, in Estes Park that are struggling, and absent additional federal relief will not survive the winter. So we, of course, we got very close, as you all know, to a relief package ultimately being finalized between the House and the Senate and the President, somewhere between the $1.8 trillion and $2 trillion numbers that the House and Senate had been had been discussing and debating. I think that there is a strong desire, as I visit with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, for us to get a coronavirus stimulus relief bill done, akin to what we did during the earlier months in this year regarding, for example, the CARES Act and its progeny, the Payroll Protection Program. As David knows, it has had its limits, and there have been a lot of hurdles and obstacles, but nonetheless, it also helped provide a lifeline to a lot of small businesses in our community. And I've heard from a lot of folks who own, mom and pop restaurants and retailers and elsewhere who've told me personally that absent the PPP, their businesses would not have survived. So that program was conceived in a bipartisan manner. It was something that ultimately received the votes of virtually every member of Congress. I think every member of Colorado's delegation, with the exception of one. And so my hope is that we can build on that and get a relief bill done. If not in the lame duck session, we have roughly 7 weeks to go in the lame duck session of Congress. I'll be back in Washington in a few short days. And my hope is that we could get it done then. But if not, certainly in the early days of the Biden presidency, the Biden administration, I suspect that we're going to be able to get that done. And happy to talk in more detail at the granular level about what that bill could include. For example, one of my priorities is EIDL forgiveness because of the way in which the PPP program and the EIDL program were structured. Obviously, the EIDL program is an pre-existing program, but nonetheless, there are a lot of businesses who are now faced with the prospect of having to pay back $10,000 that they were led to believe was not going to be the case. And so working with our local banking community and small businesses, we introduced a bipartisan bill called the EIDL Emergency Loan Forgiveness Act, which would essentially wipe away those loans. And we think that again, is a kind of an example of an idea that would be bipartisan nature, that could pass the Congress, and that we think would inure to the benefit of our community here to ensure that the economic recovery extends to all parts of our state and not just the Denver metro area. Finally, I'll just say that there's a lot of opportunity, I think, again, as we think about what this next Congress will accomplish, to, as I sort of talk about it, go back to the basics, whether it's water development and water infrastructure. We have the Platte River Recovery Implementation Plan, the reauthorization plan, rather, bill that I authored with Lynn Cheney in Wyoming that passed the Congress and was signed by President Trump earlier this year. Bills like that, which I think could ultimately make their way through the Natural Resources Committee, on which I serve. As you all know, the 2nd District is 52% public lands. And so, of course, serving on that committee is incredibly important for me and for our community. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to get something done in that regard in terms of water development and infrastructure. Wildfire mitigation and prevention. Of course, our community has just been so viscerally impacted. I've spent quite a bit of time visiting with the first responders and firefighters and the many folks who have been protecting our community for the better part of the last several months. As you all know, 2 of the 3 largest wildfires in state history occurred in the last 75 days, both of which happened here in the 2nd Congressional District in Grand County, the East Troublesome Fire and the Cameron Peak Fire, of course, in Larimer County. Thankfully, because of the heroism of our first responders and firefighters, and of course, the good weather that we've been able to get, including some snow that's still falling here down in Lafayette, we've been able to get on the other side of these fires, and we're close to getting to full containment, I believe, in the coming weeks with respect to both fires. Not out of the woods yet, but making really significant progress. But Congress has to step forward. The Forest Service at the federal level has to step forward with, I think, significant investments as far as wildfire prevention and mitigation is concerned. We know that forest health, forest management is a critical component of protecting our communities here in northern Colorado. And when we think about what Estes Park and Red Feather and so many other communities, Glen Haven here in our state, Granby and Grand Lake have gone through over the course of the last 3 months, we've got to make sure we take every measure to ensure that they don't have to go through that again in the future. And so we actually are planning a big summit later this year, to the extent anybody's would like to participate, they can reach out to Kim Red, who's in my office, is our transportation lead, but also does a number of important constituent work as well. But we are planning a wildfire summit with a variety of different stakeholders, including residents, Forest Service officials, local fire personnel, law enforcement, and so forth, so that we can really get a better sense from folks on the ground about what their priorities are as far as prevention funds are concerned at the federal level. And again, happy to provide more detail in terms of our plans in that regard. So I will just close and then happy to take any questions by saying our door is always open, and over the course of the next 2 years, to the extent that anyone has any questions, ideas, suggestions, complaints, whatever the case may be, I hope you'll reach out to us. We're certainly always willing to listen, and we like to make sure that we're responsive to your priorities and your needs, and we'll certainly continue that tradition in the next Congress.
Congressman, we'll take advantage of that open door. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions today. I had 3 questions. You answered 2 of them. So I got a 67%. So we're going to have to let you go. We're trying to get the governor in somewhere around 12 o'clock, and we have a healthcare program that'll last about 20 minutes. So thank you for joining us. We most appreciate it. Again, congratulations on your re-election, and I hope to meet you personally sometime soon.
Thank you. Thank you all. Take care.
So now we will move on to our healthcare program, and we have 2 wonderful ladies who will be joining us today, and I will go ahead with their introductions. Dr. Nicole Earhart is the director of Colorado State University's Columbine Health Systems Center for Healthy Aging and a full professor in clinical sciences at the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at CSU. She holds the Ross M. Wilkins Limb Preservation Foundation University Endowed Chair in Musculoskeletal Biology and Oncology, a real tongue twister. She, along with her colleague, Dr. Greg Ebel, is leading a statewide weekly COVID-19 testing program to identify people infected with COVID-19 living or working in senior residential care communities in order to serve as an early warning mechanism to prevent or mitigate COVID outbreaks. Our second guest is Dr. Rebecca Jackson. She is the geriatric medicine specialist and medical director at Columbine Health Systems. Dr. Jackson completed her undergraduate degree in biology at CSU, her medical degree at Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, a medical residency at the Family Medicine Center in Fort Collins, and a fellowship in geriatrics at Oregon Health Sciences University. The topic of their presentation is COVID-19 testing, Colorado State University and Columbine Health Systems, a research partnership. And if you ladies could keep your presentation to approximately 20 minutes, we would much appreciate it. We are very anxious to hear from you, so please proceed.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm so honored to have a chance to share with you some of our work that's been ongoing at CSU and in partnership with Columbine Health Systems. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides I'd like to share with you about our program. Let's see if I can just get, oops. Let's see, slideshow. Okay, so one might ask the question, why a aging research center at CSU? And the reason for this is number one, we've been for many years very active in aging research, both from the basic biology aspects to the social sciences aspects, but really had no central place to kind of coordinate those research efforts that traditionally have been siloed across campus until Columbine Health Systems was gracious enough to provide a large multi-million-dollar gift to create the Center for Healthy Aging at CSU, which exists at the health center there on Drake and Prospect, College and Prospect. So why dedicate a research center for aging at all? Well, as you probably are aware, the number of people that are aging in the world is growing. In fact, in 2019, the number of new births declined below the people that were over the age of 65. And by the year 2050, the number of Americans 85 years and older is going to triple. And that means that globally, 65 years and older people will rise to nearly 24% of the entire global population. So clearly we have an aging world, but not only that, we have a high burden of age-related diseases. And as you probably are aware, the average 65 to 69-year-old person takes 14 different prescriptions. We spend $30 trillion in Medicare over the next 20 years, estimated. Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, heart disease, et cetera, and cancer, which are age-related diseases, may represent about 80% of the US Medicare budget. And it's been estimated that if we could slow aging even by 20%, we could save the United States $17 billion over the next 10 years in healthcare costs. So this is a huge area. Sorry, 17 trillion. I misquoted that. I mean, a huge potential benefit to see what we can do to slow aging. So the Center for Healthy Aging, again, made possible by Columbine Health Systems, is a catalyst to unite interdisciplinary research and evidence-based outreach to improve lifespan and health span. And there are various core activities, but essentially what we exist to do is to create interdisciplinary team science that bridges us to rapid translation to novel treatments or interventions, and then bring that to the community and have the community engaged in our activities on campus. So this talk is about our COVID-19 activities, and as of course you know, the pandemic has highlighted the vulnerability of people that are living in residential care communities. This includes group homes, correction facilities, communal living situations, and certainly residents that live in skilled nursing and assisted living facilities are particularly vulnerable to infectious diseases. And this is because they require day-to-day care, they often have multiple health conditions, and are typically of an advanced age. And as this has unfolded, what we've discovered is about 40% of the deaths from COVID-19 nationwide are actually in long-term care facilities. These are some data from the state of Colorado showing the number of deaths related to COVID. And in Colorado, the percentage of deaths related to COVID, 53% of them have been in skilled nursing facilities or assisted living care facilities. So you can see that we're facing a very significant issue. So what I want to do is walk you backwards a little bit to the beginning of the pandemic and what started happening on campus in terms of our thinking and response to this. And of course, the first COVID case was reported in Colorado in March. And at that time, due to public health mandates, senior living communities discontinued visitors. And the guidance at the time was to screen all staff daily for COVID-19 symptoms, things like fever, cough, known travel, known exposure. And the idea there was we would hopefully prevent people that had symptoms and therefore were infectious from coming to work and spreading the disease among workers or the people that they were caring for. And also, I'm sure you remember the extreme difficulty in testing availability at the time. That at the time, the CDC test that was available was only available for hospitalized patients and people that had severe symptoms, and there really was no testing available elsewhere. So at CSU, we had several concerning issues because we understood there was a potential emerging threat to older adults. We knew that the CDC test that had been initially rolled out had contamination issues, and that had resulted in a bunch of delays in our ability to test. The diagnostic testing at the time was limited only to state labs, and all testing at that time was directed to the sick, but nobody was really talking about silent carriers. It really wasn't even known whether people could be asymptomatic and actually be infectious. And at CSU, we have a very good infectious disease program with a lot of biosafety level 3 space that's unique to our campus. And the research labs at CSU represented an untapped resource for special population testing in Colorado. This is a PCR test that we could perform in our research labs. And so we actually knew that we could scale up and operationalize surveillance efforts through CSU if we could deploy them quickly. And we knew that we could do it inexpensively. We also knew that the Center for Healthy Aging had already been establishing relationships in skilled nursing facilities for aging research, i.e. Columbine Health Systems and others. And then my colleague has been doing surveillance for virus such as West Nile for many, many years. And so the two of us put our heads together and said, how can we help? This is obviously a crisis, and time lost is lives lost. So we really wanted to deploy this quickly. But of course, we had a bunch of challenges. We had supply chain issues. We didn't have swabs. And we were not, as we were doing this in a research lab, even compliant with regulatory guidance or policy. So we went to the governor, Governor Paulus, and asked him to provide a special letter of assurance to allow us to perform this in a time of public crisis. And we received that letter. Then the other problem was we had absolutely no funding to do this. We just basically bootstrapped together money that I had received from my startup funding from becoming the director, and people volunteered, grad students, postdocs, funds, supplies. CSU grad students served as couriers, and we just got the program started on a wing and a prayer. So the program that we did was we recruited healthy people working in skilled nursing facilities from 6 different facilities in Colorado, and they consented to be part of our project. They had to have no COVID-19 symptoms and no known exposure, and they had to consent to let us swab them weekly over 8 weeks. And if they were positive, then they agreed to self-isolate and continue to be tested in the program. And then if we found a positive, we would then confirm that by CLIA laboratories at CSU and another independent laboratory, just to be sure that our results were aligned with a CLIA lab. And what we learned was really alarming. And again, this is quite early on, that 15% of these enrolled workers were positive for the virus, and yet they had 0 symptoms. They were coming to work, they were doing the best they could to protect the people that they were serving and caring for, and yet they were actually positive for the virus. And we found that not only were they positive, but not only direct care staff that were positive, but people in administration and maintenance and other areas were positive too. So this was probably the first real recognition back in March, April, May that there were a number of different asymptomatic positive people, and this was potentially kind of a Trojan horse that could be a threat to older adults. The other big question among the scientific community was, well, if you're not symptomatic, and even though you may be positive for the virus, can you actually infect others? And the way we tested this was a test called a plaque assay that essentially tells us whether or not the virus that we are getting from a swab on a positive person can actually infect cells. And indeed, these people were infectious. Not only that, but we were able to do deep sequencing of the genome of the virus, and we could show that these viruses were very related to each other, that instead of being imported from the community multiple times over and over into a facility, what was happening is that the facilities, within facilities, it would spread among workers in those facilities. So we were able to conclude that the screening for these COVID-19 symptoms, as was recommended at the time, was not sufficient to identify people that could be infectious to others, and that people that didn't have symptoms still had high virus loads and they were infectious, that identifying positive workers over time and having them self-isolate actually diminish new outbreaks. And we showed this definitively in our data. And that if we could do weekly testing, we could potentially set up an early warning system as well as a mitigation strategy to combat outbreaks in nursing home facilities. So we presented our data in May to Governor Paulus. This model of weekly testing then became the Colorado standard from that time forward. The state funding is now completely funding weekly testing programs for staff in all skilled nursing facilities and assisted living facilities in Colorado using our platform and our program. The CDC then requested our results and our samples, and that weekly testing model has now become the national model for healthcare workers around the nation. And of course, CSU's Columbine Health Systems Center for Healthy Aging has now become a national leader for response during the pandemic in protecting the lives of older adults and residential care populations. And these are the lead investigators, myself and my colleague, Greg Ebel and Christy Pavalonia, who have been absolutely instrumental in allowing us to perform this very important research, and many, many others, including our state government, our campus partners, and of course, Columbine Health Systems. And from here, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jackson, who is going to share sort of how this all played out in real life in their programs.
All right, I'm going to try to hustle through things since we do have the governor coming on soon. So, but we've been traveling through this COVID journey at Columbine.
Rebecca, this is Steve. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I think at some point I said that the governor was coming on at 12, and he's actually scheduled for 11 o'clock. So I just wanted to make that clear to everybody. Sorry.
No, it's all good. And if someone can just let me know when he arrives, we'll wrap up so that he can, take priority. So, but yes, we actually had the index case in northern Colorado return from traveling abroad and work at our nursing home in Loveland. So we experienced the first outbreak of COVID-19 in northern Colorado. To say that we were not well equipped as a country to cope with what we were dealing with at that time was really an understatement. And I will admit we had the best support possible. We had CDPHE, we had Larimer County, we were in daily communication with them. We even had someone visit us from the CDC. So we really did have some great guidance, but despite all of that, there were some barriers that Nicole did a really great job of touching on. PPE, masking was a huge issue for us initially. We had to do some navigating and some crisis standards to make sure that our staff had adequate PPE that they need. The symptoms were broader than initially told. The respiratory symptoms were primary, but obviously there was a lot of asymptomatic spread that we weren't even aware of in addition to other symptoms. So really it was hard. What's hard about COVID is you can't really trust your clinical judgment, right? So it's once you think you know it, it always teaches you something else. And so really you do need these clear, reliable data points in order to make decisions for your residents and your staff. And testing, like Dr. Earhart said, was just so limited, and the turnaround was really rough at that point in time. We were waiting 1 to 2 weeks to get tests back, and we really struggled to make good decisions based on late information. So that was also something that helped us cohort residents too. And you probably have heard about COVID units within these facilities, and you really can't develop a COVID unit without knowing where it's at. So testing was a huge hurdle for us, and North Shore was a struggle. We lasted for just 1 second. Sorry, talk about daycare struggles. I am navigating children at home today, so I apologize. But we lasted 72 days in Loveland with that outbreak. It was actually quite, it was a very long journey. And later on during the summer, we joined up with CSU, and we were so grateful for the consistent testing and rapid results that they provided, which typically came in under 48 hours. We continued the surveillance testing. We thought we kind of knew what we were doing this summer. And then in August, we realized that we were on the verge of a very large outbreak at our sister facility up here in Fort Collins, Columbine West. At this point, our testing with CSU was really well established, and they were so reliable, getting us those results back promptly. And because of that, it felt so different than any of the other outbreaks that we had been through, because we were able to clearly see where it was, identify it, isolate our residents, and take prompt action. And then this also happened to be the time period where we received our point of care testing from CMS. And while those tests have been somewhat controversial, it did serve a role during this outbreak. We used it along with the PCR, which is the gold standard, to screen all staff before coming into the facility. We were able to turn away asymptomatic staff and not have them come to work and prevent further spread that way. And it really was a game changer for us to have access to those two tests. So I will say CSU stepped up for us in a big way during this outbreak. They allowed us to test every 3 to 4 days, which really allows you to isolate where you're looking for the disease. And 1,200 tests later, we were able to contain the spread, and we were able to close our facility. So close our outbreak in 33 days, which was just tremendous. And I can't even tell you the financial benefits of being able to do that. I think it was huge to be able to close that size of an outbreak that quickly. So kind of in summary, like, COVID knows no bounds, nor does it care about what your 5-star rating is. And I think one of the things that can make us really vulnerable is our physical layout as a facility. Also, we have shared rooms, and certainly our facility at West had this. And I'm sure you guys have heard about Kirkland, the facility out in Washington that suffered such a severe outbreak. And I really think had we not had access to testing, that it could have had that potential to spread so broadly. So I will just say that, after reflecting on 2020, it's really, COVID's exposed a lot of the cracks in our society. resulting in a lot of unrest. And I hope that someday that COVID will show us just how much we have in common and what's not different about us. And I just want to say that, you know, my patients teach me profound things every day, which is why I love geriatrics. And I think through this outbreaks, I have seen that we really need each other. Connection to one another is as important as the air we breathe. So I cannot send enough gratitude to the connections that we have through the state, through CDPHE. They've been tremendous for us. Our community here in Northern Colorado, including our partners at the local hospitals, as well as our Larimer County Health Department, who was just a rock for us during this time period. And I can't even begin to express my gratitude for CSU. They have made something that seemed so impossible back in March manageable. And as a result, we've saved lives and really provided a wonderful service for this underserved population. So, and as I've told Dr. Earhart, I've never been so proud to be a CSU RAM. So I just really appreciate you inviting us and allowing us to be part of the conversation. And it looks like Governor Polis is here. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much.
Steve, you're on mute.
Thanks, Governor. That's what you're supposed to do, lead us, right? Nicole and Rebecca, thank you so much for your presentation. It was just outstanding. Governor Jared Polis, it's great to see you. Jared Polis is an entrepreneur and philanthropist serving as the 43rd governor of Colorado since January of 2019. As a member of the Democratic Party, he served one term as a member of the Colorado State Board of Education from 2001 to 2007, and 5 terms in the U.S. Congress as a representative from Colorado's 2nd Congressional District from 2009 to 2019. He was elected governor in 2018, defeating Walker Stapleton. Thank you, Governor, for joining us today. We are very anxious to hear from you.
Steve, thank you, and thank you to everyone for having me here. You know, it just I addressed the summit last year, and it just really was surprised. You know, how much has changed since last year. First of all, we're here virtually instead of in person, but more importantly, Coloradans have faced such an enormous share of challenges over the last 11 months. I don't think any of us could have imagined when we got together last year what the ensuing year would entail. The global pandemic, the 3 worst wildfires in the history of our state, including devastating wildfires in northern Colorado, a economic recession, over 2,000 Coloradans who've lost their lives due to the pandemic, and of course two for the fire, at least, in Estes Park. Look, well, a lot has changed. The key issues that Coloradans care about are really more important now than ever before. And as we build back stronger, Northern Colorado and the Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance are really positioned to play a critical role in our recovery. Northern Colorado is a driver in our state's economy, home to critical sectors, diverse sectors, tourism, energy, advanced manufacturing, agriculture, ranching, higher ed, really a robust economic diversification in Northern Colorado. And we know that some industries have been affected more than others by the pandemic and the global recession. Industries like tourism have been impacted by this pandemic, energy prices. We look forward to really building that stronger in the hard-hit sectors. Now, advanced manufacturing and agriculture are key parts of our economy that have been a bit more stable, not without supply chain issues, of course, and frustrations. But we really believe that demand remains strong and that some of these key sectors will help lead us out of the recession in Northern Colorado and across our state. Last week, I released my fiscal budget for the next year, 2021-2022, which really focuses on how we can help Coloradans get back to work, recover equitably and more quickly, and invest in our future for lasting benefits. So in addition to restoring the painful cuts that were made in the spring and saving for Colorado's future by restoring our reserves to historic highs, we're including a one-time stimulus package with one-time investments that help Coloradans get back to work, invest in our infrastructure, transportation, competitiveness as a state, To help those hardest hit by the pandemic, the stimulus includes items like one that we've already worked with the legislature to do, which is a direct payment of $375 to 435,000 hardworking Coloradans that will hit their accounts in the next few weeks. They don't need to apply; they'll simply get it. We're also proposing $105 million in tax relief and direct aid for restaurants and bars and businesses that are hit by capacity restrictions. To build our economy back even stronger than before, we're including $220 million to create jobs and invest in shovel-ready public works and infrastructure projects, $160 million to invest in broadband to enable business and education and healthcare, $140 million to invest in workforce and incentivize businesses to grow in Colorado, and $200 million that we plan to work with Republicans and the Democrats in the legislature to allocate. In our budget, we also recognize the importance of higher education. That's why we restored many of the cuts, capped tuition increases to 3%, and also allocated money to increase the operational efficiency of our institutions of higher education. But look, supporting transportation and infrastructure is not only an important way to stimulate the economy, but it also is truly important for our state's competitiveness. And you've all done long time advocacy on this, but it's to better connect and support hubs of economic activity and recreation across our state, really to improve our quality of life, improve our competitiveness, reduce time that is lost in traffic, increase productivity, better air quality. Our budget includes $220 million now to invest in jobs. In addition, we are developing a strategic pipeline of projects to really make sure that we are able to get those shovel-ready funds out the door. We're also keeping our commitment to finish the construction of I-25 North express lanes between Berthoud and Fort Collins on schedule. Even as the economic conditions shift, that commitment from us remains. Northern Colorado is a really important economic hub for our state. This year's wildfires, the economic challenges as people were forced from homes, the psychological challenges amidst the pandemic. We also are having an extreme drought, as you know, statewide, and we've set aside $78 million in our budget for fire prevention, response, and recovery efforts. This is very important for the entire state. We're currently working on feedback on that aspect as well. Now, I want to take a few minutes. What would any discussion be without discussing COVID, which is certainly the crisis of the moment? Our economic recovery really depends on us doing better keeping the coronavirus rates down. And we're seeing an alarming increase in case numbers and hospitalizations. We've already passed the hospitalization levels that we saw in March and April. Over 1,000 Coloradans are currently hospitalized from Over 1,000 Coloradans are currently hospitalized with COVID-19 in our state. And for the month of November, we're strongly encouraging Coloradans to only interact with people in your own household. Just delay your plans with others who aren't in your household to avoid further transmission. It is more dangerous now than it was in March and April in Colorado. Highest rates we've ever had. 1 in 100 people are currently contagious with the deadly virus. Over 1,000 Coloradans are currently hospitalized. And look, we all are tired of the virus, but the virus is not tired of us. And people are just getting complacent. As we approach the winter months, there's colder weather, there's holiday travel, there's flu season. We must do more as a nation, as a state, as a local community, in your individual households to simply change course. And we're going to need help from all of you to get the word out about the seriousness of the virus in our state and remind people that we have to get back to what we know works. We know how to stop this thing. We just need the resolve to do it. Wear a mask, avoid social interactions with people outside your household, physically distance at least 6-8 feet, even if you're wearing a mask when you're talking to folks, wash your hands with soap frequently. These are simple things, but we're not doing well enough, and our economy will suffer. We'll have unnecessary loss of life, and it'll be harder for Coloradans if we don't act now. Our actions impact everyone we come into contact with, our neighbors, our parents, our children, our friends, our coworkers. Their lives and your own life are truly in our hands. So look, we faced a lot this year, but I know that together we can get through it and build back even stronger than before. Thank you to the strong partnership that we have with the Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance for having me today. Thank you for your work to support Coloradans, and I look forward to working together in the months and years ahead. Thank you. Steve, you're on mute again. There you go.
May we ask you a couple of questions?
Sure, we have a couple of minutes.
Okay, very good. First, I want to tell you that I think the governor's office, you obviously have been very wise and measured in how you responded to the coronavirus. I think you've done a really very nice job. The other thing I want to tell you is that I like seeing your request for a 10% increase in reserve, or an increase in reserves to 10%. It's something that I've long advocated. I was on the Joint Budget Committee in 1999 and 2000, and we weren't thinking about reserves then because the economy was so lively that our problem was we had way too much money. But I think that the higher level of reserves is great. My question is, I've looked at a little bit of your budget, and I'm a little bit concerned about a lot of really positive things regarding your plan of action. How are we going to do all of it from a fiscal standpoint and a revenue standpoint?
Okay. Well, the voters helped with that, Steve. The voters passed Proposition B. And I think this group was part of you guys supported that, right? I think you were part of that coalition. The chambers were, and I think this group was. But in any event, not only does that avert a tax increase on businesses, very important now, this will net an additional few $100 million to the state and more over time. Also, Proposition EE passed overwhelmingly. That was like 67% of the vote. And for the next 2 years, that helps fund our schools and rental assistance and other programs before it goes to preschool. So we have a one-time carry forward, Steve, which is the funds for the stimulus are essentially from a one-time carry forward. And then you're right, and this is why the reserve is so important. Things are in many ways more challenging for 22-23 than they are for 21-22, and so it's really important that if we are restoring cuts, that we don't just go up and down and up and down. We want to restore those cuts to our most, education, other important programs, but we want to be able to maintain that over the next few years because this recovery doesn't happen overnight. And so I think it's important to be, sort of prudent, thoughtful in the budget, and it's a good time to have a record reserve of we propose 10%.
There's Moody's a couple of years ago suggested that Colorado ought to have reserves at 14% for on the low end and 26% on the high end of general fund reserves. Just as a point of information.
Yeah, and for folks who aren't as in the weeds on the call, historically we've been in the 7 to 8% range, at least the last few years. I don't know, so those, just so you are hearing on the call. So, and we went down. We spent appropriately, by the way. When the coronavirus hit, we spent down some of those reserves to get through it. I think we went to a low of 2.8% briefly.
0.86, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and then now we're proposing take it back up to 10.
So last question. I didn't hear in your comments a recommendation for a specific general fund appropriation for transportation. Any thought of doing that?
Well, so two things on that. One is we have the one-time stimulus transportation piece. It's 220 for infrastructure. I think it's 160 for kind of roads and bridges. The others are other kinds of infrastructure, including working with local municipal governments for downtown improvements and state parks. What I think is an enormous opportunity this legislative session is for Republicans and Democrats to work together on modernizing transportation funding going forward. And I think it's a very exciting way that we can work to really address the need. There's no 1 year amount that can do it, Steve, as you know, that's realistic. It's not about a 1 year investment. I mean, it's a good faith effort and it's important to do because you just have to keep, there's a state of repair, you have to keep roads in. But this is really a systemic funding issue and one that I really think the Democrats and Republicans can address working together.
I think that we proposed a bond issue in in the 2015 session that failed. We think that's still a good idea. We think it was a great idea when it passed in the year 2000 and built multiple pieces of highway infrastructure around the state.
And there's some room in the COPS, the certificates of participation. There's still some room in that for us. We're pending the kind of where the financial markets go, but there's still a few $100 million of room for that to occur in the next year as well.
Well, we'd love to talk to you about a bond issue, but in short, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I think it's who has obviously a great history in your business career. You're a businessman, you have business sense, and that's good for business organizations like the Loveland, Greeley, and Fort Collins Chambers and our two economic development organizations. So thank you for being here.
Thank you all for your thoughtful work, and we'll look forward to engaging with you on transportation and infrastructure and the other issues that are important to building Colorado back stronger. Thank you.
We're not going anywhere, that's for sure. It's time for us to bring our Regional Issues Summit to a close. First, today's event is only possible because of the strong support of our sponsors. They made it possible for us to all attend this at no cost. We want to thank Elevations Credit Union, UC Health, BizWest, Columbine Health Systems, Officescapes, Woodward, Alpha Graphics, Campus Credit Union, Northern Engineering, Signorama, and Total Facility Care. Thank you as well to all of our speakers today. And don't know about all of you. I don't know about all of you, but I'm walking away with a lot of new insight. All the materials from today, including the video, will be available on the NCLA and the Fort Collins Area Chamber of Commerce website. Thank you and have a great day.